Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, American Comics. The Savior starting from the vampires. Chapter 1. It's snowing heavily in Gotham's East End in November. Located in the eastern part of Gotham City, it is the poorest and worst public security area in the city. Drugs, murders and other crimes are being committed all the time in the dark corners. In a relatively peaceful and stable neighborhood, Wallier Street, there is a small bar that is about to turn off its lights. Emily put away the wine glasses and coffee tables that the guests had drank from. Her delicate little face was full of exhaustion. How have you considered that matter? A big man, nearly 2 meters tall and with a strong back and waist, walked up to the skinny Emily. Uncle Jodson, I will resolutely defend the only legacy left by my father. There is no way I can sell this bar to them. Okay, Michu's has a pretty good daughter. If you need anything, just call me. No matter what, Michu's is my best brother. Thanks, Uncle Jodson. Boom. As the glass door of the bar shattered, countless stones were thrown in. Jodson's Chinese character face was full of anger. He rushed forward and stopped in front of Emily to prevent the stones or glass fragments from being hurt. My best friend's daughter. Ha ha. Alas. Buzzing and booming, black motorcycles passed by at high speed, and young men with colorful hairstyles were sitting on them. Their faces were full of smiles, and their eyes were full of madness. Through the broken doors and windows, they looked at the two people, revealing an exaggerated grimace. Then he walked away. These guys. Jodson looked gloomy and was about to call someone the next moment, but Emily behind him quickly stopped him. Uncle Jodson, it's just some broken glass. I can clean them up tonight. Looking at Emily's determined face, Jodson felt helpless. Emily, Uncle, please go back quickly, the night on Wallier Street is not peaceful. As the silver bell on the glass door rang softly, Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Uncle Jodson's lonely back. No matter how helpless she was at this moment, she couldn't ask Uncle Jodson for help, which would very likely destroy the gang that Uncle Jodson managed to run. Boom. A slow knock on the door made Emily, who started cleaning the broken glass on the floor with a mop, tremble all over, and looked timidly towards the door of the bar. A young man wearing a black trench coat walked slowly into the door, and then fell to the ground. Seeing the young man, a look of surprise flashed across Emily's delicate little face, and then she hurriedly ran forward, slowly helped the man who fell to the ground in. Mr. Lin Ju. Emily looked at the Asian man with messy hair in front of her, covering his eyes but still unable to hide his handsome face. Miss Emily, can you let me stay here for one more night tonight? Lin Ju looked at the delicate porcelain doll-like girl in front of him, with a hint of embarrassment in his tone. Emily looked at Lin Ju's messy footprints all over his body and the wound at the corner of his eye. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned around and quickly took a fur coat and a small medical kit from the back hall of the bar and came to Lin Ju. In front of me. First, he put a heavy fur coat on Lin Ju's body, then took the red potion and rubbed it on the corners of his eyes. This is not the first time such behavior has occurred. Kind girl. Lin Ju stared blankly at the delicate face so close in front of him, especially the pair of blue pupils, which seemed to be the clearest and cleanest thing in this chaotic world. Okay, Mr. Lin Ju, I don't want to hear the cause of the dispute between you and others. What you have to do now is to have a good rest. Looking directly into Lin Ju's eyes, Emily said with a serious face. Thank you, Emily. Mr. Lin Ju, I really think you need to find a job and live a stable life. Are you hiring here? Lin Ju looked at the girl in front of him hopefully. I'm sorry, I may have to close this pub soon. Emily lowered her head and raised the corners of her mouth, trying to keep smiling, but Lin Ju, who had extremely sharp eyes, still saw the flash of luster in the corner of her eyes. Scanning the bar, I saw that although the bar was small, it was well equipped. Although this bar was very small, it had all kinds of facilities. Compared to other bars, there were even many safety tips posted here. No drugs. Be careful with any glasses of wine handed to you by strangers. It is precisely because of this rule that is extremely different from other bars in the surrounding area that this small bar business is unexpectedly booming and is widely praised by the surrounding neighbors. This is also the only bar where Lin Ju has stayed since time travel. Noticing the broken glass remnants around him and the windows letting in the cold wind, Lin Ju felt a little sorry for the only innocent person he had met in the 3 months since he came to this world. Is it a motorcycle gang? Mr. Lin Ju, thank you for your kindness. Emily declined the kindness of the man in front of her who was about the same age as herself. She didn't know Lin Ju's purpose for this man who suddenly appeared on Wallier Street and had been patronizing her bar for the past 3 months, but she knew he was a good man. This happened because a drunk man suddenly made trouble in the bar, but Lin Ju, one of the bystanders, stepped forward without hesitation and knocked the man to the ground in an instant with a gorgeous combination of punches, avoiding further losses to the bar. This is simply unbelievable in Gotham, which is full of crime, and Lin Ju did not even ask for any benefits. This incident has always warmed Emily. Later, after she deliberately inquired, she learned that Lin Ju had been helping victims. Helping oppressed people solve their problems, and even though she will be paid, it still makes her feel cool. Now she hopes that Lin Ju can find a normal job and survive peacefully. However, Lin Ju didn't think so. In fact, he completed today's punishment mission early and taught a homeless man who tried to molest a female student. When he went to Emily's bar, he happened to meet him who was walking towards Emily's bar. Stone-throwing bikies. This injury on his body was caused by the fight with those gangsters from the motorcycle gang. Even though he was agile and experienced in combat, he could not withstand the siege of 5 people and still suffered a little injury. Fortunately, it was precisely because of this behavior that he activated his golden finger in advance. The next moment, a thought came into my mind. A horrifying cover comes into view. It was a pale head with a pair of scarlet pupils on gray-white skin, and a long tentacle-like tongue spread out from the mouth. An extremely scary and cold feeling lingered around Lin Ju. Bloodlines. The memory of his past life echoed in Lin Ju's brain, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He immediately recognized this thriller American TV series with a vampire theme that he had loved so much. The play mainly tells the story of a Boeing 777 passenger plane that lost communication with the ground and landed at JFK International Airport without any signs of life. CDC biological threat investigation experts discover a new type of parasite, which begins a war between humans and vampires. The vampires there are completely different from those in Twilight and the Vampire Diaries. Under their ugly and ferocious appearance, there is endless hunger hidden. What scares Lin Ju the most is the extremely terrifying and disgusting infection ability. Those countless tiny worms are simply Lin Ju's nightmare. In that drama, many people, including the main characters, were unknowingly invaded by those worms, thus becoming a bloodthirsty monster. Compared with vampires in the traditional sense, their speed and power may not be outstanding, but the most troublesome thing is their silent infection. Thinking of the film and television series in which a certain star suddenly dropped his brother while going to the toilet because he was infected with worms, Lin Ju felt his scalp numb. Is this my golden finger? Looking at the cover of the series that was full of horror, Lin Ju felt that it was okay not to do it. However, as if sensing the dissatisfaction in his heart, a message came into his mind at this time. The first time you travel to a different world, you will successfully activate your natural talent, dimension deprivation. Special abilities that can be used when entering a special dimension. In the extra dimension, all creatures that have been defeated or have no sense of resistance can be deprived of their abilities. Note: the deprived ability will be optimized to remove negative effects. Take away the ability to defeat creatures. Lin Ju's pupils suddenly widened, and his originally negative heart suddenly changed. In the face of huge interests, anyone will overcome all fears. He looked at the thin Emily cleaning the dilapidated hotel alone, and then looked at the messy wounds on her body. Lin Ju gritted his teeth and looked at the scarlet cover in front of him, his heart moved. Then he saw the scarlet movie and TV series cover that only he could see. It was like a door. It slowly opened, and a dark vortex came into view. Looking around, Lin Ju was surprised to find that everything around him seemed like time. Pause. Looking at the endlessly deep gate of time and space like a black hole, he realized that he seemed to be able to only step in and could not do anything else. The idea of borrowing the time-stopping ability in his mind came to an abrupt end. Endless darkness flashed by, feeling nothing. Lin Heng slowly opened his eyes. In the dark airplane cabin, there was silence all around. Everyone closed their eyes tightly, as if falling into a deep sleep. The familiar scenes in front of him made his expression change drastically. A dull sound gradually came from the airplane aisle behind him. Lin Ju couldn't help but curse crazily in his heart. He didn't expect that when he traveled to the world of vampires, he would land directly on the plane at the beginning of the series. Didn't this fool come up to give the final boss extra food? Frantically insulting his own golden finger, Lin Ju closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and calmed down his heart, which had never been beating so violently since he was a child. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the white man sleeping vigorously next to him. The thoughts in his mind were flowing crazily, and the dull sound was getting louder and louder. The closer I get, it seems like someone is walking slowly with their feet in hand. Inside the dark airplane cabin, Lin Ju felt extremely kicked. At this moment, he could feel his heart beating like a bell. With the insight of the vampire ancestor, he would probably notice something strange about him before he even walked in front of him. But there was nothing he could do at this moment. Could it be that he was asked to fight back? With his body of less than 150 kilograms, it was not enough for the ancestor to take a bite. Will I be the first time traveler to be killed by my own golden finger? Lin Ju collapsed on his seat, helpless. The footsteps behind him finally came to him. However, to his surprise, the visitor did not stop at all and continued to walk forward. Lin Ju opened his eyes in surprise and saw a stewardess in uniform and high heels beside the aisle, leaning over to inspect the passengers on the left side in front. It hasn't started yet, I almost scared myself to death. However, the next scene made his expression tense again. He saw an abnormal noise coming from the rear of the plane. He turned around and saw a flight attendant looking at the floor door lock of the cargo hold in astonishment. The flight attendant in the aisle of the plane obviously realized something and hurriedly ran towards the cargo hold. This familiar scene made Lin feel like his liver was splitting and his brain was running at high speed. The next moment, he raised his head and shouted loudly, "You pigs are going to crash." This loud shout was particularly harsh in the quiet plane. The white man next to him was the first to wake up and subconsciously looked back and forth. More and more people woke up from their sleep. After noticing the situation, they began to curse. "Who is it? Mischief." The angry man next to him glared at Lin Ju. However, seeing Lin Ju's wide-eyed eyes and ferocious look on his face, the anger on the man's face disappeared without a trace in an instant. He cowered his head and did not dare to make a sound. At that moment, a pair of hands suddenly grabbed his chest. "Wait, brother. Sir, everything is safe. Please return to your seat." The flight attendant comforted the frightened passengers while looking at Lin Ju, who rushed over with a wary expression. The voice just now attracted her attention instantly. Seeing the man who caused the trouble walking towards her, she subconsciously touched the electric baton hidden under her uniform behind her. Lin Ju didn't even look at the stewardess who was supposed to be the first in the original drama. He looked eagerly behind her. At this moment, the flight attendant in the cargo hold was leaning over and close to the floor, seeming to be listening to something. "Stop that bitch over there, or I'll detonate the bomb." Lin Ju raised the pen he got from a certain man and yelled. This scene was so frightening that several passengers on the side who wanted to stop Lin Ju immediately shrank back to their original positions. Even the stewardess who wanted to step forward to subdue Lin Ju froze in place. Looking at the flight attendant who quickly stood aside and the cargo deck that had returned to calm, Lin Ju suppressed the wildly beating heart in his chest, looked sternly, and shouted in a deep voice, "You all get to the cargo cabin, now." Immediately, his voice echoed throughout the plane, and everyone looked horrified and angry. "I'll count to 3. If anyone moves too slowly, I'll detonate the bomb and kill us all together at an altitude of tens of thousands of meters." "Brother, you have something to say." A white man with thick limbs and a burly body stood up with a frightened expression on his face, shouting at everyone, hoping that they would do as Lin Ju said. This man was like a switch. Everyone stood up in panic, and under Lin Ju's eyes, ran to the cargo hold one after another. "Everyone, stand there for me. If anyone comes out from there, I will detonate a bomb. As long as everyone does what I say, I guarantee that the plane will arrive safely." Boom! A dull sound came from the floor above the storage room, and the passengers who had already filled the cargo hold looked at their feet in shock. Lin Ju was shocked. "That's my friend. If he comes out, you will all die. The reason why I did this is to protect myself. That guy has a gun. I don't want to die. If everyone wants to live, crush them to death on the deck of the storage warehouse. Quote. What has a gun? Those losers at Berlin airport. Press down, hold down quickly, don't let this guy come out. The big white man who had been the first to obey Lin Ju lay down in an instant, pressing tightly against the plywood entrance of the storage room. Several people on the side quickly piled on top of it, and soon the floor entrance of the storage room was full of people. Bang bang. There were 2 violent crashes in succession, and the crowd above the storage room shouted. God, why is that guy down there so powerful? Fake. Everyone come together quickly, don't let this guy come out. Everyone, hold on, Ms. Fooley, report to your superiors quickly. The black female stewardess noticed Lin Ju, who was standing aside with an indifferent expression, and seemed to believe what he said, and quickly started dialing the police number. Boom. There was a loud noise, and the people on top of the storage room shook. Everyone had a look of horror on their faces. The big man lying at the bottom was a little lucky. Fortunately, the door of the storage room was made of special alloy. There is no need to say how hard it is. Lin Ju, who noticed that the blood ancestor might not be able to come out for a while, breathed a heavy sigh of relief and leaned limply on the seat. He looked at his unconscious neighbor next to him and patted his face. Thanks, brother. It was a completely subconscious act just now. Seeing that it was too late to stop the flight attendant from opening the cargo hold, Lin Ju subconsciously made up a lie. First use bombs as a threat to quickly gather these passengers above the cargo hold, and then use the noise caused by the blood ancestor's attempt to rush out of the cargo hold to create a terrorist carrying a gun. In this way, even if his bomb lie was exposed, he believed that those people would still help him block the entrance to the cargo hold. After all, the movement expressed in the cargo hold truly confirmed what he said. Listening to the flight attendant successfully calling the aviation center, Lin Ju's heart dropped from his throat slowly. The rest of the trip was spent in everyone's fearful mind. As the plane landed steadily at the tower, a large group of people wearing black police uniforms and holding guns or explosion-proof shields surrounded the airport. Looking down through the airplane window, Lin Ju finally relaxed completely. Looking at the passengers who were still blocking the warehouse, I couldn't help but give them a thumbs up. Soon, with the arrival of the police, everyone on the plane breathed a sigh of relief. Lin Ju was also carried away by 4 fobolers. High-security interrogation room. Lin Ju, a native of Shaw, what is the purpose of coming to New York, and why did you lie about the plane having a bomb? Officer, I'm sorry. I just heard a loud noise from the storage compartment of the plane. It seemed like there was something there. I happened to watch a movie about a plane crash before flying to New York, so I was worried about what was hidden in it. I had no choice but to take this step. What's hidden in that storage bin? Everyone on the plane at that time can testify to me. Quote, Officer, can I ask the plane's storage compartment, have you checked it? Nothing. Your behavior has seriously affected the rules and regulations of international aviation law. Lin Ju didn't listen to the punishment measures that followed. After being detained for 3 days, he was successfully released. Plot changes, plot points gained, 30. Change the plot and you can get plot points, which can be used to exchange for things and enhance the host's personal abilities. Items currently redeemable. Anti-worm body. Quote, anti-worm body. Lin Ju's eyes widened. What was it that scared him the most about this movie? It's not the overwhelming power and speed of the blood ancestor, but the worm invasion that we must be wary of at all times when there is a large-scale infection later. Once a tiny worm burrows into your skin, it will rapidly multiply in a short period of time until it is all over your body. Lin Ju shuddered just thinking about the image of the flesh and blood all over his body being filled with worms. As soon as he thought about it, the next moment, the introduction information about the anti-worm body appeared in his mind. Anti-worm body. Vampire worms are only applicable to vampires of the vampire family and have a strong repellent effect. This ability has a single structure, so choose carefully. Redemption value. 30. Good guy, are you really stuck on me? Lin Ju exchanged this ability without hesitation, and the next moment, a faint fragrance came from his body. Etc. Mosquito repellent toilet water, or the Liutian brand. Lin Ju's face twitched at the familiar smell that filled his nostrils. At this moment, there were countless horses in his heart trampling on his broad mind. Okay, as long as it works, Lin Ju kept comforting himself. Looking at the bustling streets with people coming and going around him, he quickly thought about what to do next. The reason why he didn't directly tell the police that there was an ancestor of vampires hidden in the cargo hold was because he was self-aware. As an Asian man, he spoke softly and spoke like a lunatic. Don't talk about him like a lunatic. Even the person who was a disease control officer in the original drama, the main character, the medical staff at the center, had no choice but to be locked up by the police anyway. So from the beginning, Lin Ju had no hope that those fobolers could help him end the blood ancestor. Now that the plot has changed, the male protagonist who is affiliated with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention should not have come into contact with the mutated monster yet. Wrong. Lin Ju suddenly thought that in the original drama, the ancient stone coffin where the blood ancestor was sleeping would be touched by logistics personnel, and someone would probably be killed. You know, because of Lin Ju, the blood ancestor did not take any of the passengers on the plane. The blood must have been thirsty for a long time. Lin Ju's brain was thinking rapidly, and he suddenly thought of Gus, a strong man in the early stage of the protagonist group. That guy will successfully cross the river with the sarcophagus of the blood ancestor and reach Manhattan, which will also lead to the fall of the city behind. The image of Gus driving a large truck quickly came to mind. Since the coffin was transported from the cargo hold of the plane, it must not be far from the airport. Lin Ju quickly found nearby passers-by to ask for directions, then directly called a taxi and sped towards the target location. As night falls, the whole of New York is brightly lit, and a truck driving in the night rushes towards the bridge connecting New York and Manhattan. Gus took a long drag on his cigarette and looked at the rearview mirror from time to time. Through the rearview mirror, he could see a huge sarcophagus. The coffin box is carved with fine lines, skulls, swords and countless hideous monster images. The entire sarcophagus is filled with a simple and ancient atmosphere. This is the last time. Gus's eyes flashed slightly. He didn't know what was in the sarcophagus, but he knew that it must be prohibited items, otherwise Ihorst would not have ordered a person with a criminal record to secretly transport them. Looking at the overpass not far ahead, Gus breathed a sigh of relief. He had just passed the Phobal checkpoint, which really scared him. If he was caught by the police and sent to jail again, then his mother would definitely be because of it. He died in the hospital because he failed to pay his medical bills in time. This is also the reason why he helped Ihorst, all because of the medical sponsorship of Stoneheart Group. Poof! The strange noise behind him made Gus's eyes tremble slightly, but looking at the overpass in front of him, he didn't think much about it and just thought it was a bump in the road. We are about to reach our destination. When the truck was about to exit the bridge, a figure suddenly appeared in front of the road where Gus was driving. Fortunately, there was still some distance away from the truck, so Jess reluctantly stopped the car in front of the man who suddenly appeared in front of him. Anger surged in his heart, he frowned to suppress the uneasiness in his heart, and looked directly at the other party. Hello, Mr. Gus, my name is Lin Ju, nice to meet you. At this time, Lin Ju, who was wearing a black windbreaker and smiling, walked slowly to the front of the truck and looked at the familiar face in the driver's seat of the truck. It was Gus who was pretending to be calm. I couldn't help but feel a little emotional. The reason why Ihorst chose Gus was not without reason. As a very distinctive character in the early days of the vampire clan, Gus has a strong sense of fighting. Because the control is in the hands of the Stoneheart Group, he has been helping the Stoneheart Group to do some shameful things. When Lin Ju actually came face to face with him, he could feel the sharpness hidden in the eyes of the man in front of him. As expected of a man who could face a vampire up close and then successfully escape. Gus frowned slightly, raised the corners of his mouth, looked at the Asian man slowly walking over, and tried to stay calm. Can I help you? Good Samaritan, can you drive me to Manhattan? Carry you? Sorry, I have a mission, so I may not be able to help you. Brother, tell the truth. If you don't want to die tragically at the mouth of that monster lying in the sarcophagus, maybe you can consider my opinion. You know what I'm lucky about. Gus's expression finally changed. Looking at the handsome Asian man in front of him, his expression was uncertain. But Lin Ju walked straight to the car, slowly opened the door, and sat in the passenger seat with a calm expression. Looking at the sharp blade against his side, Lin Ju didn't panic at all. Not to mention his understanding of Gus's character, he was sure to escape successfully based on his own fighting skills. You don't want Mom to lose you tonight. Lin Ju didn't look at Gus, but stared at the rearview mirror with a hint of horror in his eyes. Noticing Lin Ju's gaze, Gus was extremely confused. The visitor didn't seem to be targeting him, which made him feel a little relieved. In the sarcophagus is. Shish. Lin Ju put his index finger up in front of his mouth. Under the pale light of the street lamp on the side, his cheeks looked a little penetrating. Gus's face was a little solemn. He suddenly realized that Lin Ju seemed to be staring at the sarcophagus from beginning to end, and his slightly contracted pupils seemed to be wary of something. He subconsciously looked in the rearview mirror, and the sarcophagus was still silent. The two were silent until Gus slowly drove the truck to the designated location. Lin Ju quickly took out the ultraviolet lamp he bought from the material store from the bag on the side. Under Gus's surprised gaze, he stepped out of the car. What are you up to? Gus frowned. He didn't understand what the purpose of the Asian man in front of him was. Just hand one of the UV lamps to Gus. If you don't want us to die tragically here, just keep using this lamp to shine on the sarcophagus. Lin Ju then added a small searchlight to his hat, gently pressed the button on the back, and the purple light illuminated the front. There was a hint of urgency in his eyes, and the next moment his hands directly touched the sarcophagus. Under the cold touch, the voice in his mind suddenly sounded, and a different color bloomed in Lin Ju's eyes. Is it really possible? Deprivation, Lin Ju murmured in a low voice, and the next moment, an invisible wave passed through his palm towards the sarcophagus. Under this invisible wave, Gus, who was standing aside, looked confused. From what he could see, Lin Ju just put his hand on the sarcophagus. However, the next moment, under his curious eyes, the sarcophagus suddenly shook violently. The huge stone material hit the iron deck of the truck heavily. The violent sound made Gus instantly fall to the ground in fright. Lin Ju's eyes darkened slightly. Under the illumination of the ultraviolet lamp, his face was uncertain. Feeling the power emerging from his body, his hearing also greatly increased. He instantly noticed the slowly rotating locks inside the sarcophagus. Not good. It's coming out. The next moment, he jumped out of the car, and Gus, who was originally outside the car, was already running towards the gate. The huge sound just now really scared him. The sarcophagus weighing more than 500 kilograms seemed to be hiding something terrifying. Coupled with Lin Ju's previous words, he could no longer hold back at this moment. With that creepy feeling, he ran away with an ultraviolet lamp in his hand, and the purple light flashed around him. This guy. Lin Ju looked at the sarcophagus with some pity. The next moment, feeling the power emerging from his body, he gasped slightly, twisted his body, and chased Gus at an extraordinary speed. Such rapidity. Lin Ju was ecstatic in his heart, and extraordinary power surged out of his body, but he had only absorbed part of the power. He knew the vampire series very well, so of course he would not give up this opportunity. His own natural talent was shining brightly in his mind. Deprivation awakened, it takes effect on any character who does not resist, and can deprive the character of its beneficial characteristics. This is why Lin Ju took the risk to find Gus this time, because this is the time when the blood ancestor is most defenseless in the early stages. It was a pity that his natural talent did not take effect instantly, so he did not take away all of it. Feeling the power emerging from his body, Lin Ju had the feeling of pushing aside the clouds and seeing the rising sun. When he ran out of the gate, his keen hearing instantly heard a loud sound coming from the direction of the truck behind him. That guy is out. Lin Ju's legs swung wildly, like an afterimage, and he rushed in front of Gus in an instant. Roar. The roar that resounded throughout the entire underground lane was like thunder in the sky. Eichhorst, dressed in a crisp suit, rushed straight to the truck. Looking at the tall, burly, pale man standing outside the truck, who was nearly 2 meters tall, he instantly fell to his knees. Great Master, you are finally here. Eichhorst's eyes were fixed on the ground, not daring to raise his head. Facing the Blood Lord, he was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Ehorst. The deep voice was accompanied by swallowing sounds like wild beasts from time to time. The Blood Lord's scarlet pupils stared at his only servant. What just happened? Ihorst was shocked to find that his head was instantly grabbed by a big hand, and he grabbed it directly and stopped it in front of the Blood Lord. Great Master, why are you so angry? Eichhorst's eyes were filled with fear. Scarlet pupils stared at the frightened Eichhorst in front of him, and a low voice slowly echoed in the underground garage. Give me blood food, In the early morning, a yellow bus carrying students drove slowly through the abandoned suburbs. There was laughter in the car, and the children with an average age of 6 or 7 were looking out the window with great excitement. This was their first spring outing. The school had informed them that they were going to the suburbs. This group of children was very excited. Mr. Eichhorst, thank you for your funding, and thank you Stoneheart Group. The young female teacher with brown curly hair looked at the old man in a suit and tie in front of her with a smile. Seeing these cute children, I feel like I'm a lot younger. Eichhorst raised a strange smile on his lips, staring directly at the teacher in front of him. Malaise, who was a little embarrassed by the sight, felt a sudden chill in her body. She turned her eyes to the child and relaxed again. She suspected that she had not had a good rest last night. Soon, the bus arrived at its destination smoothly under the route guided by Eichhorst. A dilapidated manor full of age, with brown buildings standing in a sea of green. What a nice view. Mellie's eyes sparkled with light, and she looked at the old building full of historical and cultural atmosphere in front of her with some joy. As the bus door opened, Eichhorst stood in the manor, with a fascinated smile on his face, and his deep eyes scanned the delicate skin of each child. Welcome everyone. Thanks. This group of uniformed students got out of the car happily one by one and ran to the grass outside the church. As a teacher at Meinster Elementary School, Mellie's chose to get off the bus last, until the last child got off, leaving only the driver and her in the empty bus. Just when she couldn't wait to get out of the car, a hand grabbed her arm. Mellie's was a little stunned and looked back at the driver who had been silent. Ms. Mellie's, maybe I need to talk to you. The bus driver's straight western hat slowly lifted up, revealing an extraordinary handsome Asian face. There was a smile on the man's face. It was Lin Ju. Not long after, Mellie's walked off the bus absent-mindedly, tightened the collar of her clothes, and followed the children step by step under the gaze of Eichhorst. It wasn't until their figures disappeared into the ancient castle in the distance that Lin Ju slowly got out of the car and came to the side of the car. The compartment usually used to store luggage was opened, and a person was hiding inside. How's it going? Do you believe what I say now? Lin Ju looked at Gus with a smile. Gus's face looked a little ugly. He never expected that the Stoneheart Group would attack a group of 6 or 7-year-old children. When he thought of the monsters in Lin Ju's mouth that feed on human blood, he couldn't hold back the anger in his heart. Slowly patting his shoulder, Lin Ju said in a deep voice, "It's not too late now. We will act according to the plan in a while. If we are lucky, we can directly end the ancestor of the vampire here." This time, Gus didn't hesitate at all. He directly picked up the big bag behind him with a determined look on his face and rushed towards the bunker quickly. Dark bunker tunnel. Mr. Eichhorst, how far is the journey? Mellie's asked, pretending to be calm and trying to maintain a calm tone. Ms. May, you'll be here soon. My boss is happy to receive this group of children. It seems that because everyone has gone deep into the crypt, Eichhorst's original elegant temperament has disappeared. His eyes with deep meaning are staring at the seemingly calm Mellie's next to him. After tightening the collar of her blouse, Malaise's heart was beating crazily. Thinking of the conversation in the car just now, her face turned a little pale. Suddenly, Eichhorst seemed to notice something and looked at the dark tunnel behind him intentionally or unintentionally. Then, with a smile on his face, he continued to lead Malaise deeper into the tunnel. At this time, Gus, who was following far behind, was hiding in the corner next to the tunnel, with a hint of horror in his eyes. He had been extremely careful, but he didn't expect that Eichhorst still seemed to notice him. Putting aside the unrealistic thoughts in his mind, Gus gritted his teeth and listened to the happy laughter of the children deep in the tunnel, holding 2 LED lights in both hands, and followed slowly. Boom! The thick stone door seemed to be driven by some kind of machine and slowly opened. The children looked at the scene in front of them in amazement, which satisfied the adventurous spirit hidden in their hearts. One by one they rushed in happily. Kids, stay in good formation. Melis was a little anxious. She called out to the children. Feeling the hot eyes behind her, she became more and more frightened. The gaze behind her seemed like a glutton, wanting to devour her in one gulp. It was a gaze she had never experienced before. The children were full of curiosity and came to a rocky place similar to a pool. Seeing the scene described by the driver, Melis was horrified and quickly shouted for the children to gather around her. At the same time, he looked at Eichhorst with wary eyes. "Ms. May, what's wrong?" With a smile still on his face, Eichhorst walked straight to the pool, staring directly at the frightened Melis. "Mr. Eichhorst, I have decided to cancel this autumn trip. I feel uneasy here." "Oh, but my master is already here." "What?" At the same time, under the dim light, the water in the pool continued to bubble. Melis stared at the pool in astonishment. Suddenly, the sound of splashing water suddenly sounded, and a burly figure jumped out of the pool. The figure was more than 2 meters tall, and the bright red liquid on its burly body continued to flow down the black robe to the ground. The strong smell of blood hit her face, and Melis showed fear. She instantly opened her collar, took out a spherical object from her arms, pressed the switch with her thumb, and instantly threw it forward. However, the next moment, Eichhorst blocked the figure at an extraordinary speed. The spherical object hit him, bursting out with a dazzling light. Ah! Roaring like a wild beast, Asht fell to the side instantly, and the spherical object was tightly covered by his clothes. At the same time, a tall figure jumped out and rushed straight towards Melis and the children who were screaming. The burly figure possessed extraordinary speed. Afterimages flashed past, and arrived in front of Melis in the blink of an eye. Amidst the exclamations of the children, the big hands with long claws fiercely grabbed the woman in front of them. At this critical moment, a loud shout suddenly came from the tunnel gate, "Monster, look at the light." As the words fell, a man holding an ultraviolet lamp rushed into the dark cave hall and threw the ball-shaped object in his hand towards the Blood Lord. This spherical object was like a grenade, instantly bursting out with dazzling purple light in midair, illuminating the entire hall. Roar! The Blood Lord's scarlet pupils were oozing with blood, and thick black gas instantly emerged from the place illuminated by the purple light. It let out a heart-rending roar, and the strong fishy wind howled at the tips of Melis's hair, and her figure. A group of children fell to the ground. The thick flesh thorn barely missed her body. Violent roars resounded throughout the hall, and the Blood Lord's body was filled with thick black smoke. He curled up and turned into an afterimage, rushing towards the blood pool. Plop! Splashes of blood spread all around, and his huge body quickly sank into the pool of blood. Seeing that the blow was successful, Gus rushed straight towards the blood pool. He took out an ultraviolet explosive ball in his hand and pressed the button. Just when he was about to throw it towards the blood pool again, his figure suddenly flew out, dripping with blood. The flesh thorns shot towards his body. Falling to the ground like a conditioned reflex, Gus relied on his extraordinary reaction speed to dodge the bloody touch. Roar! Eichhorst let out a ferocious roar, his cheeks spread sideways, and ferocious flesh thorns shot out from his mouth again. However, Gus was obviously not a vegetarian. He directly blocked the special ultraviolet light shield behind him in front of him. In an instant, the light shield that activated the switch emitted purple light, and at the same time, the flesh thorns also hit hard. Gus's strong body when thrown backward, even a flesh thorn is incredibly powerful. And Eichhorst felt even worse. The front end of the tongue-like fleshy thorns was instantly burnt. When he retracted the fleshy thorns, he covered his mouth tightly, and his throat kept making beast-like gurgling sounds. "Gus, you are so brave, have you forgotten that your mother is still waiting for you in the hospital?" Eichhorst curled up in pain. Not only his tongue, but his whole body was torn to pieces at this moment. Even if he was exposed to the ultraviolet light for a moment, he was extremely traumatized. On the other side, Melis was so frightened by what she had just experienced that she could not help herself. She was stunned in place, especially the ferocious flesh thorns as thick as human thighs stretched out by the Blood Lord, which instantly frightened her to death. "Let's go." Gus turned to look at Melis, who was surrounded by children, and shouted sharply. You must know that the reason why he rushed in so desperately was because of these children. "Ah, okay, thank you, sir." Melis was out of breath, stammering, staggeringly stood up from the ground, and grabbed the child beside her in a panic. Kids, let's go. Roar. The violent roar resounded in the cave, and Gus felt the shaking earth with a shocked expression. This unparalleled power caused even him, who has always been tough and brave, to feel a deep sense of fear deep in his heart. The next moment, red liquid sprayed down, and the burly figure emerged from the pool again and rushed towards the child who ran to the gate. This situation made Gus's eyes wide open. He took out the ultraviolet explosion lamp from his bag in a panic and threw it directly in the direction of the children, hoping to stop the Blood Lord. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and held the ultraviolet light in his hand. Shield, rushing straight towards the Blood Lord. The ultraviolet explosion lamp instantly emitted a dazzling purple light. Seeing the burly figure shooting backwards, Gus breathed a sigh of relief. However, the next moment, his expression changed drastically. An afterimage rushed straight towards him. In the blink of an eye, the 2-meter-tall Blood Lord appeared in front of him, and a thick flesh thorn stabbed hard at his neck. The Blood Lord's target seemed to be him from the very beginning. Just when the flesh thorn was about to bite Gus's face, a scorching flame swept from the side. The ferocious cannon instantly hit the Blood Lord's burly body, knocking him to the ground instantly, and Gus, who was closer, fell to the ground under the impact of the hot cannon fire. At the gate, Lin Ju, who was resisting the rockets with his shoulders, leaned back slightly and casually threw the barrel of the rockets to the side. His figure passed Melis and others and rushed towards Gus. His speed is also incredibly fast. Although he has not yet reached the level of a Blood Lord, he is not afraid of giving in to Ihorst. Looking at the trembling Blood Lord lying on the ground, the ultraviolet explosion lamp emitting dazzling light instantly hit his bloody body. Lin Ju rushed to Gus's side and pulled him behind him. With a sharp look in his eyes, he stared at the Blood Lord who was burned by ultraviolet rays. "Who are you?" A huge roar resounded in the cave. The Blood Lord huddled under the black robe covered with blood and let out a heart-rending roar. As the light of the ultraviolet explosion lamp dimmed, Lin Ju turned on the light on his forehead. UV searchlight. He looked directly at the monster huddled under the black robe. A clear voice echoed through the cave. "Hello, dear Blood Lord, my name is Lin Ju." Before he finished speaking, ferocious flesh thorns shot straight from Lin Ju's side, but a sword light flashed past. "Ah, silver sword." The instantly traumatized Ihorst covered his bloody mouth and fell to the ground wailing in pain. Lin Ju danced the sword flower gorgeously and spread the blood stained on the sword on the ground. With his extraordinary eyesight, he could see that the blood flowers were mixed with traces of squirming worms. The long sword in his hand turned into a bolt of lightning, shot out, and instantly penetrated the Blood Lord who seemed to have made some move. Roar. Ignoring Ihorst's wails at all, under Gus's shocked eyes, Lin Ju walked towards the Blood Lord who was lying on the ground and trembling with the sword pierced through his body. Deprivation. One hand hovered in the air above the Blood Lord wrapped in a black robe. Fluctuations of invisible energy spread out instantly, and the Blood Lord roared like a wild beast, resounding throughout the cave. "It's you." The next moment, under Lin Ju's shocked gaze, the black robe covering the Blood Lord was instantly lifted, and a ferocious big hand slapped him hard on the chest. However, Lin Ju was already on guard, dodged sideways, and struck the Blood Lord's blood-stained chest with a backhand punch. Boom! Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Under the incredible gaze of the Blood Lord, Lin Ju kicked him like lightning again, hitting him in the abdomen and sending his burly figure flying away. As the figure flew backwards, it turned into a black shadow, and the afterimage flashed by. Lin Ju felt a shiver in his heart, and subconsciously blocked Gus in front of him. However, the afterimage only passed Ihorst. A black shadow enveloped Ihorst, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared deep into the dark tunnel. "Stop chasing." Lin Ju grabbed Gus and looked at the dark passage with regret, which must lead to the sewers of New York. It must have become a paradise for monsters now. "God, you must be a witcher sent by God." Lin Ju looked helplessly at Gus, who kept nagging beside him. God. Lin Ju did not tell the origin of the Blood Lord, otherwise Gus would lose his faith. "How are your mother's arrangements going?" "Oh, friend, thanks to you, I have been successfully transferred to Manhattan Central Hospital." Gus scratched his head, feeling a little embarrassed. Considering the medical fees in the United States, it must have cost Lin Ju a lot of money. Lin Ju happily accepted Gus's thanks. Of course, Lin Ju would not tell him the origin of the money. At the same time, Shixin Group would not wantonly report the theft of a certain vault run by it. What a pity for such a good opportunity. Lin Ju never expected that the Blood Lord would dare to face the ultraviolet light directly, and still be penetrated by the silver sword. But this time, he also benefited a lot. His eyes flashed slightly, and a translucent light curtain that only he could see appeared in front of him. Lin Ju. Natal talent. Dimension deprivation. Ability. Immortality disabled. It is necessary to seize the body every 100 years, live forever, and live forever. Body of the ancestor disabled. Extraordinary physical fitness and self-healing ability, needing to drink blood to replenish energy. Extra abilities are discovered by yourself. What is different from before is that this time, although the deprivation time is short, the ability has been greatly strengthened. Even in his personal panel, these two ability information appeared that made him excited. At the same time, he also understood that only by completely depriving the Blood Master could these two abilities be perfectly optimized. There was a burning light in his eyes. Long-term vision, close at hand. His eyes scanned the information about one of the powers back and forth, and the corners of Lin Ju's mouth raised slightly. The body of the ancestor was far from being as simple as what was described in its information. Leaping high, under Gus's shocked gaze, Lin Ju jumped up to the tree trunk easily, a full 3 meters in height, and seemed to still have some energy left. Oh, my God. Gus's face was full of disbelief. He didn't know what he was thinking of, and a hint of vigilance suddenly flashed in his eyes. Don't think too much. I'm not one of their monsters covered in worms. Lin Ju chuckled softly and saw the reason for Gus's change of expression at a glance. Gus's face was a little embarrassed again. A narrow and historic street, with an old pawn shop sitting on the corner. The thick wooden door has been somewhat deformed after years of baptism. Inside the store, the dim light shines on the old items. A gray-haired old man slowly walked outside the store with a silver-handled cane. His old eyes stared at the extremely dark sky, wondering what he was thinking about. After a long time, he slowly walked back into the house, closed the door of the shop tightly, and hung a wooden sign with the words, "Suspension of Business," in front of the door and window. Abraham entered the inner room from a corner of the shop. It was also dimly lit, but there were all kinds of strange utensils placed inside. Most of them are silver items, including silver long swords, ancient long bows, and various instruments used for hunting large animals. His eyes looked at a transparent glass bottle on the exhibition table. A beating heart is displayed. The surface of the heart is full of wrinkles, and the whole is gray-white. There are countless tiny worms spreading out from the gaps in the heart, and the bending and swinging look extremely weird. It seems that you are here after all. Abraham stared at Weird's heart and muttered to himself. New York Central Hospital. As the largest and highest-level hospital in New York City, all the medical staff have serious faces at this moment. People with calm expressions and lifeless bodies were pushed to the hospital one by one. As the door of the infirmary opened, Yin Fu, an expert from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, wore strict protective clothing and slowly walked into the quarantined hospital. Assistant Nora was already waiting aside. How's it going? It hasn't been performed yet. The cause of death of some of them is unknown, and some of them have small cuts on their necks. Nola's face was full of solemnity. After so many years of working at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this was the first time she encountered such a strange situation. Most people died for unknown reasons, and the wounds on some people's necks seemed to indicate another sign. This seems to be more than just the epidemic mentioned above. They are miners at the Allen mine. There was a collapse underground and these people were trapped inside. When the rescuers outside arrived, they looked like this. There was a look of inquiry on Yin Fu's face. He stepped straight into the isolation room. As far as he could see, all the people had lost their lives, and their skins were all pale. Slowly, he came to a man who seemed to have nothing strange about him. His hands wearing protective gloves placed on the man's body and gently pressed his pale skin. This guy's body has lost its elasticity. There was disbelief in Yin Fu's eyes. You must know that these people in front of him had just died less than a day ago. Their blood seems to have been sucked dry by something. Nora looked a little ugly and explained softly. Obviously, she had just done a rough inspection. The blood was sucked dry. Yin Fu frowned tightly and examined the bodies of these people, observing several dead people with incisions in the hidden parts of their necks. "Take me to the mines." Immediately, under the leadership of Nora, the two took a CDC vehicle and headed towards the Allen mine. At the same time, another medical staff came to the isolation room. As Yin Fu's friend, David was also an expert from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Having just received the news, he was ready to take the lead in conducting autopsies on these corpses. Slowly coming to the body of one of the white men, David's face remained normal and he directly began to dissect. When the sharp scalpel cut through the pale skin, his pupils shrank sharply. White blood mixed with a trace of light yellow slowly overflowed from the wound. David swallowed his saliva and hurriedly scanned the protective clothing on his body to see if there was anything missing. It wasn't until he checked every corner that he breathed a sigh of relief. He took the knife again and directly cut open the chest of the deceased in front of him. Putting aside the white blood, the organs in the chest of the deceased made David's face with disbelief. With an uncomfortable and disgusting expression on his face, David slowly took out the heart from his chest and placed it in front of his eyes. He carefully observed the still beating heart. Countless tiny worms slowly moved from the surface of the heart towards the heart. His leather gloves crawled away. Throwing his heart to the side in a panic, David tore off the leather gloves in a panic. Those white worms simply touched the bottom line in his heart. However, with such a move, the worms on his sleeves instantly turned toward him, hands crawl away. He took off his gloves in a panic and looked at the worms burrowing into his skin. He hurriedly grabbed the tails behind the worms, trying to pull them out of his body. However, as one after another was pulled out, more worms followed the cortex in his palms and slowly burrowed along his arms and into his upper body. Cold sweat was constantly dripping on his face, and even though his hands were dripping with blood, he still did not give up. But behind him, without realizing it, the dead people slowly sat up from the hospital bed. "Has the latest rat taken hormones? How dare you attack me? There's so much coming out of the sewers, how long do we have to clean it up?" Two white men were walking on the street, their faces full of sadness. At this moment, puffing sounds came from the cloth bag behind them from time to time. Slowly opening the bag, it was filled with mice that made sharp noises. Some mice were actually biting their own kind. My God, these beasts eat all their own kind. The two walked into the Rat Prevention and Health Bureau and threw 2 sacks of rats directly into the stove. Accompanied by a sharp hissing, a burning smell wafted from the fireplace. A tall man slowly walked up to the two of them. He was carrying a sack on his back and seemed to be going out to hunt rats. "Where are the most rats?" Vasily looked at the two men with calm eyes. "Oh, Vasily, you can go to the reservoir in the West District and have a look. I heard that it is close to a rat infestation. God, if I don't get a raise in wages, I won't work." Listening to the complaints of the two people behind him, Vasily walked out of the store carrying the sack. As an ordinary rat catcher in New York City, Vasily has always taken his job extremely seriously. Now that rats are infested, he should go and clean it up. But he didn't notice that after he walked out of the store, one of the men opened the sleeves of his legs and feet. At this time, his ankles were dripping with blood. "Rat, it bit me." The reservoir in New York is vast and sparsely populated. As one of the few suburban locations in New York City, Vasily quickly found the underground pipes located here. Squeak! A swarm of rats spewed out from the sewer outlet. Even Vasily, who had always seen a lot of things, looked solemn at this scene. Could it be that some new creature appeared in the sewer? The experienced Vasily suddenly became suspicious and found the key point at once. Unless more dangerous creatures appeared in the sewer, these rats would not all come out of the sewer. Slowly putting the mouse trap on his back, Vasily was not in a hurry to deal with the spilled rats. He decided to find the source first. Only by solving the root problem can these rats hide again where humans can't see them. Place. He found a nearby sewer wellhead, moved the heavy iron wheel away, and placed his belongings outside the sewer wellhead, then slowly climbed down the sewer stairs. As one of the largest economic cities in the beautiful country, New York's sewers serve as sewage discharge systems and also exist as air raid tunnels, so there is a lot of space inside. The burly and muscular Vasily jumped straight down the tunnel, turned on his flashlight, and shined the light ahead. The surrounding rock walls were pitch black, and water that was always smelling of stench slowly flowed in the underground passage. Fortunately, Vasily was wearing rubber shoes. Illuminated the surrounding area with a light and scanned the place illuminated by the light. There should have been many rats hiding here, but Vasily found that the silence here was a bit scary, and he walked slowly towards the depths of the tunnel. Before he had taken a few steps, he suddenly paused and stared directly at several hunched figures in the shadows. These people stood motionless in the darkness. The caution in his heart prevented him from saying hello as soon as he came up. This was the first time he encountered so many people in the sewer. The light of the flashlight slowly shone on this group of stooped people who didn't know what they were doing. With pale skin, scarlet pupils, and bald heads, the very different appearances of the people in front of him made Vasily feel a chill in his heart. Gulu. Like the swallowing sound of a wild animal, the sound echoed through the dark underground passage. The flashlight in Vasily's hand shone forward. While watching these strange people, he slowly retreated back. Sudden roar. The next moment, accompanied by violent roars, these strange-looking pale figures suddenly rushed towards Vasily. Not knowing what was going on, Vasily threw away the flashlight in an instant and rushed towards the way he came before. When he came to the stairs, his figure quickly climbed up, and one after another pale figures followed him closely behind. The speed of these people was unusually fast, and even Vasily could not shake them away. When he saw the sewer stone cover above the stairs that he had conveniently closed, Vasily's heart sank. Gritting his teeth, the next moment, he wanted to use his body to directly push open the stone cover, but the touch of his feet suddenly shocked him. At this critical moment, the sewer cover above suddenly opened, and the sunlight instantly shone through the sewer opening on Vasily's face, and at the same time, it reflected the rickety figures under him. Roar. Like the roar of a wild beast, mixed with a hint of painful groan, under Vasily's horrified gaze, the group of monsters beneath him seemed to be burned by the sun, with white smoke steaming all over their bodies, and they rushed towards the dark tunnel. His chest was rising and falling violently, Vasily's face was pale, and he was breathing heavily. Although he didn't know what these people would do, he had a hunch that once he was caught by these people, the consequences would be disastrous. Without the slightest pause, he hurriedly climbed out of the tunnel and looked at the two people standing aside with a hint of gratitude. At the same time, there was a trace of doubt in his eyes. Thanks. Vasily thanked the Asian man in front of him awkwardly, with a hint of fear still on his face. Hello, Vasily. Lin Ju slowly stretched out his hand, with a smile in his eyes, looking at the bearded man in front of him, who quickly regained his composure. This person is none other than Vasily, the most powerful person in the protagonist group. Judging from his performance in their film and television series, his strength may even be inferior to Gus. Tall in stature and with astonishing reflexes, he performed extremely well. Whether he decisively asked his family to leave the city or hunted those mutated vampires alone, his rational brain and powerful strength won unanimous praise from the audience. In his previous life, he was one of the few characters who made Lin Ju feel safe while immersed in movies and TV series. How do you know my name? Vasily frowned and looked at the young man with a warm smile in front of him with some vigilance. His eyes hurriedly glanced at the short-haired Gus. By the way, Gus's body shape and temperament reminded him of those gangsters who usually do nothing on the streets. Not only do I know you, but I also know why those rats come out of these sewers. Because of those weird people. Vasily had a trace of doubt on his face. No, they are not humans, they are the most terrifying creatures in the world. Lin Ju walked to the entrance of the sewer. Through the darkness, he seemed to see scarlet and bloodthirsty pupils, staring at him. Blood Lord, wait for me. Silently shouting into the sewer, Lin Ju smiled. In the Allen mine, the entire barren hills were surrounded by a cordon. Police cars were parked outside the cordon. From time to time, heavily armed special police officers looked around, wary of the approach of unrelated persons. Yin Fu slowly walked forward and showed his ID. Under the leadership of a man named Phobel, he walked into the dark cave. At this moment, a huge pit has been dug out of the entire cave, with 5 white tents surrounding it. Hi, Yin Fu. Jim, wearing a heavy coat, greeted Yin Fu with a solemn look on his face. How about it? The pothole has been sealed, and something special has been found inside. Jim's eyes flickered and his voice was a little urgent. Yin Fu patted him on the shoulder, and soon he and Nora, wearing white protective suits, entered the mine under the leadership of a staff member. As the mine went deeper, under the illumination of searchlights, some unknown slime began to appear around the mine. Yin Fu looked at the mucus gathered in a puddle somewhere, and he vaguely seemed to see something. Nora, bring the ultraviolet light. Yin Fu thought thoughtfully. Soon, purple light shone on the entire mine rock wall. Looking around, Yin Fu and Nora both had shock in their eyes. On the rock walls everywhere, there were unknown traces of gleaming light emitted by ultraviolet lamps. There was much more to this special liquid than what they saw. Under the illumination of the ultraviolet lamp, a tiny worm emitted flame-burning mist, and was instantly scorched in Yin Fu's surprised eyes. After a series of sterilization and disinfection measures, Yin Fu came to the research tent nearby with a hint of eagerness. At this time, Jim was watching a staff member operating something. Yin Fu walked up to him. The man was holding tweezers and slowly placing the slide containing the liquid collected in the pit under the microscope. Inside here, the staff member frowned, and Yin Fu took the microscope from his hand and looked at it intently. There seemed to be several tiny insects inside the unknown liquid, slowly squirming. Initiate first-level prevention and control measures. Yin Fu's face was more solemn than ever before. Thinking of the people who died in the hospital ward, he had an ominous premonition in his heart. Commissioner Yin Fu, there is an old man outside who wants to see you. A phobo suddenly walked in from outside the tent. Quote. Outside the cordon, Yin Fu looked impatiently at the old man with white hair and a cane in front of him. Are you the person in charge here? Abraham looked at Yin Fu solemnly. Yes, what can I do for you? Yin Fu tried his best to suppress the anxiety in his heart and said in a deep voice. Now he is a little anxious because of the unknown epidemic and has no time to comfort an old man who has lost his family. However, things did not develop as he expected. Those people are all infected. Everyone who comes out of the pit must die. Their heads must be chopped off to stop the Blood Lord's conspiracy. Abraham looked at Yin Fu with anger in his expression. What? Frowning, Yin Fu looked at the old man in front of him who seemed to be talking nonsense. He was somewhat doubtful about the mental state of the old man in front of him. Old sir, please leave first. Things here are under the control of RCDC. Rejecting Abraham's proposal directly, Yin Fu turned around and left. Nora on the side looked at Abraham apologetically. You must chop off their heads, they will be resurrected again, and then they will be bloodthirsty monsters. Abraham roared angrily, and soon, he was pulled away by Jim. After poking the crutch in his hand bitterly, Abraham sped away in the old car. Nora, who was walking behind Yin Fu, watched the old man leave with thoughtful eyes. Mine, Yin Fu, maybe you should listen to that old man's opinion seriously. Nora looked at her longtime friend and colleague. Cut off the head. How old is this? I really doubt that he has some problems. Yin Fu nodded his head with one hand, looking a little helpless. Jingle bell. The ringtone of the mobile phone was particularly harsh in the mine. Yin Fu looked at the caller ID and hurriedly answered the call. What? Come to life. With a trace of surprise on his face, Yin Fu hurriedly hung up the phone and rushed out of the mine like flying. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, New York Central Hospital. Yin Fu strode forward, followed by Nora and Jim. There was a lot of excitement outside the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention at this moment. They are the family members of the victims in the mine, and there are also some reporters. Nora stood next to Yin Fu and said quickly. Yin Fu ignored these people and walked straight into the hospital. His eyes immediately saw the people surrounded by many isolation sheds at the moment. His eyes passed over the familiar faces, and he came to a pale man. Doctor, I'm fine now, please let me go home. The pale man stared straight at Yin Fu. At this time, a mysterious voice kept ringing in his heart, urging him to go home and see his family. Looking at the face of the man in isolation, Yin Fu frowned. The man in front of him didn't look good, and his skin was even abnormally gray. This is most likely a sign of an underlying disease. Sorry, sir, maybe you may have to stay here for a while. Yin Fu's tone was unquestionable, but soon, the phone rang in the office of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Jim rushed forward with anxiety on his face. Yin Fu, orders have been issued from above to release all survivors home. What are the people above thinking? There must be something wrong with these people. Yin Fu stared at Jim with eyes full of disbelief. Then he quickly took out his mobile phone and dialed the number. As the call was connected, Yin Fu's expression kept changing in just 3 minutes. Soon, with the help of medical staff, all those who survived were sent to their families by the CDC, and each one was taken home. His face was extremely gloomy. Yin Fu was a little confused as to what the people above were thinking, and Nora patted his shoulder with a worried look. By the way, where are those who died? It should still be in the morgue. Rushing towards the morgue quickly, he realized that he seemed to have overlooked something. Soon, the 3 of them arrived at the messy morgue. Their eyes passed over the blood on the ground. Yin Fu's heart sank, and Nora couldn't help but scream. David, I saw a fat body lying quietly on the ground, his neck covered in blood. Yin Fu rushed forward in a hurry, and Jim's expression changed drastically. Just when Yin Fu was about to run in front of David, who was covered in blood, suddenly twitched and sat up from the floor. The sudden change caused Yin Fu to stop instantly, and at the same time, he subconsciously pulled Nora beside him. Under the nervous gazes of the 3 people, the pale David stood up unsteadily, and then slowly walked towards Yin Fu. David. Nora's face was filled with concern, and she noticed David's dull eyes. There's something wrong with him. Yin Fu's eyes were fixed on David's pale face. When this former friend was a few steps away from him, his pupils shrank instantly and he stared straight at him. The next moment, under the horrified gazes of the 3 people, David's cheek slowly split open, and a flesh thorn shot out from his mouth like lightning, aiming directly at Yin Fu. Yin Fu instantly lay down on his side to evade, but when he was attacked, his subconscious reaction saved his life. Nora and Jim, who were shocked, rushed forward to help, but the lightning-fast flesh thorns kept sliding towards their bodies, making it difficult for them to get close. Boom! With a dull sound, the mutated David fell to the ground instantly, and the fire bottle that hit his head also fell heavily to the ground, making a huge noise. With lingering fear on his face, Yin Fu rushed forward with a somewhat crazy look, grabbed a fire bottle and hit David's head hard, like a wild beast's roar, mixed with a violent impact. Under the horrified looks of Nora and Jim, David's head was smashed open. At the same time, it seemed that he had lost his life due to the head injury. Yin Fu looked pale and was breathing rapidly. Looking at his former friend, his expression was extremely ugly. At the same time, in a small courtyard with beautiful scenery. Dad! The crisp words echoed inside the courtyard, and a little black boy rushed toward the haggard man with a face full of joy. The man's body movements were a little stiff, and he slowly held the little boy in his arms. His wife behind him quickly hugged him from behind, and the family of 3 felt like they were crying with joy. But from a perspective that the little boy and the woman couldn't see, the pale white film on both sides of the man's eyes blinked rapidly vertically, which looked extremely weird. Gulu. A low sound like a beast swallowing sounded in their ears, and the little boy looked curious. Dad, were you swallowing just now? Slowly breaking away from his father's arms, the little boy looked at his father with a haggard face and lifeless eyes with some fear. The blonde woman on the side seemed to notice something was wrong, and quickly pulled her son to her side. Helen, what's wrong with you? The blonde woman looked worriedly at the man who was staring directly at the 2 of them. After pondering for a while, the man made a hoarse voice and tried hard to take his eyes away from his wife and son. I feel a little uncomfortable. Hearing the man's words, the woman slowly breathed a sigh of relief. She almost didn't recognize her husband just now. He quickly pulled the man into the room and placed his hands on his unusually cold palms. Ah, why are your hands so cold? The woman hurried to the kitchen again, preparing to boil a pot of hot water to warm the man's hands. Along with the buzzing of the kettle, the sound of things falling to the ground came from the hall. The woman frowned and looked back. Helen, what happened? She looked outside the house through the glass door of the kitchen, and the scene before her made her whole body tense suddenly. At this moment, her son's feet were exposed outside the coffee table, and he fell to the ground and was shaking. Her husband was lying on top of her son, not knowing what he was doing. Helen, the extremely confused woman rushed out of the kitchen and walked up to him. The scene in front of her made her fall to the ground in fright. A fleshy tentacle about the thickness of an arm protruded from the husband's mouth and stabbed his son's neck. The fleshy tentacle stirred from time to time, as if blood was flowing along the fleshy tentacles toward the husband's mouth. The man was actually swallowing his son's blood. Ah! Screams came from the house, and the woman struggled to push the man away. However, the next moment, the flesh thorn suddenly retracted into the man's mouth, and like lightning, it instantly bit the woman's neck. Ah! Ahem! The moment the bite was taken, the woman stood frozen on the spot. The flesh thorn seemed to have some unknown paralysis properties. Her body was shaking, but she was unable to struggle. The beautiful courtyard regained its tranquility once again. At New York Central Hospital, Yin Fu placed David's body on the autopsy table and looked at his former friend with a pale expression. Jim on the side kept insulting him, looking a little crazy. Nora, on the other hand, was in tears, standing aside helplessly, not knowing what to do. Taking a deep breath, Yin Fu picked up the scalpel from the table beside him. He wanted to dissect David on the spot. The flesh thorn he had just seen completely overturned his three views. The current David was definitely not a human being. As the corpse was dissected, white blood slowly flowed down, and everyone had a look of horror on their faces. Yin Fu looked solemn, put on his gloves and slowly pulled at the inhuman organs in the chest. The scene in front of him subverted his 20 years of medical common sense. All the organs had undergone unknown changes, especially the still squirming heart. Under the bright light of the autopsy table, worms were slowly squirming in the flesh. It looks extremely impressive. What have I done? Behind him, Jim suddenly fell to the ground in pain, with regret on his face. Jim, Nora on the side was a little confused. I'm sorry, it's my fault. I don't know what's hidden in that coffin, and I don't understand why the Stoneheart group lets go of those people who seem to have mutated. Jim was a little incoherent. Looking at David's changes, he knew that he had made an unprecedented mistake this time. Under Yin Fu's angry eyes, Jim told him all the causes and consequences of the Stoneheart group's order to transport the sarcophagus on the plane and the release of those who had awakened. Boom! With anger on his face, Yin Fu knocked Jim to the ground with a fierce punch. I'm sorry, Yin Fu. Jim said with regret on his face. What a fool! Yin Fu grabbed the upper collar of Jim's clothes tightly, stared at his friend, and was about to punch him again when Nora quickly hugged his body and pulled him away. Now is not the time to be resentful. I should quickly solve the problems happening here and stop the spread of the disease. Nora shouted with an anxious look on her face. Yin Fu's face was extremely ugly. At this moment, the door to the isolation room was instantly knocked open, and several police officers in black special combat uniforms rushed in. The leading police officer first glanced at David lying on the bed and glared at Yin Fu sternly. Mr. Yin Fu, why did you kill Dr. David? After saying that, regardless of Yin Fu's explanation, the police officers on the side rushed forward and held down Yin Fu, who was loudly telling the reason. With disbelief on their faces, Nora and Jim took him away directly. It's the Stoneheart group, they control the police station. Jim, who had a deep understanding of the Stoneheart group, looked miserable. At this time, he felt extremely hesitant and regretful. These black-hearted businessmen and those politicians. Nora's face was pale, and the successive emergencies made her brain confused, and she didn't know what to do. Suddenly, a figure flashed in her mind, the old man she met outside the mine. The old man's words echoed in her mind, seeming to come true to what was happening before her. Nora quickly picked up Jim. She was going to find the old man to find out what happened. So, all this is the conspiracy of the Blood Lord, the ancestor of vampires. Vasily chuckled. He felt as if he had heard the biggest joke in the world. Hey, brother, didn't you see what happened just now? Those pale guys are all blood-sucking monsters. Gus shouted with some regret. Those guys may just be infected with some disease. Vampires, such magical creatures, don't exist at all. Vasily shook his head. Those strange people didn't attack him just now, so he just thought they had some mental problems. You guy, Lin, why don't you speak? Gus, who was a little angry, suddenly noticed Lin Ju, who looked calm on the side. Lin Ju had no expression on his face, and he seemed calm and composed. He grabbed Gus, who was about to follow Vasily into the door of the Rodent Prevention Health Bureau. Quote. Gus looked at Lin Ju with some doubts, not understanding what the mysterious Asian youth in front of him was thinking. Everything must be seen to be believed, Lin Ju said lightly, standing at the gate of the health bureau, watching Vasily walk into his workplace. He was familiar with the plot and knew that the people in the anti-rat health bureau had already changed, even including Vasily's secret crush. Sure enough, just after entering the gate, not long after, there was a sound of something falling to the ground in the health bureau, as if someone was fighting inside. Gus on the side was about to rush over, but was pulled by Lin Ju the next moment. Don't worry, he always has to experience it before he can understand it. Lin Ju still has great confidence in Vasily's strength. He is the most dazzling supporting role in the Blood Clan series. Even Gus may not have a chance of winning in front of Vasily. There was an angry shout in the health bureau. Lin Ju frowned. He noticed something wrong and rushed in. At first glance, he saw Vasily falling to the ground. A pale figure suddenly pounced in front of him, and a flesh thorn rushed in front of him in the blink of an eye. Oh! Gus's exclamation came to his ears. The scene in front of him happened too suddenly. In addition, Lin Ju's attention was on Vasily. This time, he had no time to dodge. The flesh thorn instantly touched Lin Ju's neck. The next moment, the health bureau staff who stretched out the long flesh thorn was like licking a hot iron. He instantly retracted his tongue, and the whole person let out a sharp roar, and rushed in the opposite direction away from Lin Ju. However, Lin Ju did not intend to let go of the vampire in front of him who dared to attack him. His figure turned into a residual image, and the whole person moved in front of the monster as if he was transferred instantly. The silver sword in his hand was like a flash of lightning, and instantly crossed the monster's neck. Under the shocked eyes of Vasily and Gus, the mutated vampire's head slowly slid down from the neck, took out a piece of paper from the pocket of his shirt, and wiped the special mucus on his neck. Through the mucus, Lin Ju clearly saw several worms that were no longer moving. It is worthy of being Liutian brand floral water. Lin Ju secretly admired in his heart. If he didn't have the anti-worm body, he didn't know whether his ancestral body would have any effect on these worms, but when he thought about this kind of worm drilling into his body and multiplying, Lin Ju felt sick. Lin. Gus hurried forward. A long time ago, Lin Ju told him how these vampires were transformed. He looked at Lin Ju's neck nervously, but he didn't see any wounds. Worms can't do anything to me. Lin Ju looked at the female vampire whose head he had cut off with a sword. If nothing unexpected happened, this should be Vasily's secret crush in the series. He didn't expect that Vasily didn't open the curtains as in the original series, and killed this person directly through the sunlight. The plot has changed again. He looked at Vasily. At this moment, he was supporting his forehead with both hands, and there was still some lingering fear on his face. Lin Ju saw the pain in his eyes. Gus slowly walked up and patted the tough guy. Brother, condolences. Obviously Gus also realized something. As night fell, Vasily came to his former home. Looking at the small house in the dim light, his face was a little tangled. With the knock on the door, the old man slowly poked his head out. Vasily, what are you doing here? The old man's eyes were distant and had an inexplicable meaning. Dad, please move out of this city, now and immediately. Quote. Just think of it as for me. Vasily looked a little depressed, and left without caring about his father's reaction behind him. The old man silently watched Vasily's back as he left. He hated Vasily's job as a mouse catcher, which made him feel embarrassed, but he still loved his only son deeply. Walking out of the courtyard, Gus, with an excited face, stretched out his fist to Vasily, but Vasily did not fight him. Brother, don't be so boring. Gus was a little helpless, and Vasily looked at Lin Ju who was silent on the side. Lin, tell me, how can we stop this disaster? Vasily said he didn't want to waste time. Lin Ju smiled. With the help of these two people, he seemed to be one step closer to his plan. First, we need to let people know about the coming of this disaster. A few mornings ago, Vasily held a leaflet with detailed warnings not to approach anyone who behaved strangely or looked strange. Almost every passerby he saw, he would hand one out, and on another street, Gus did the same thing. Everyone who first received the flyer was confused and then threw it aside. Most people sneered at it. However, Vasily and Gus are still working tirelessly, because what Lin Ju wants is just a little reaction from people, no matter whether the reaction is good or bad. In a dark sewer, Lin Ju was walking in the dark pit. At this time, he was not afraid of the monsters hiding in the darkness. A scarlet gaze was cast. Looking at Lin Ju slowly walking into the darkness, none of the monsters hidden around him dared to take action rashly. "Why are you immune?" A low voice resounded in the darkness. It seemed to be the voice of the Blood Lord, but Lin Ju knew that it was just a vampire possessed by the Blood Lord. "Because I am the one who judges all evil, so how can I be afraid of evil methods?" Lin Ju pretended to be mysterious and said that he knew that the Blood Lord must be hiding in the sewers, but the specific location, even he who was familiar with the plot, did not know very well. The main purpose of coming this time was to eliminate some vampires and collect white blood. "Impossible. God will never allow such an existence like you." A low roar resounded in the depths of the dark cave, and in the next moment, countless flesh thorns swept towards Lin Ju. The slender sword shadow flickered in the cave, accompanied by the screams of the monsters. Chapter 11. Today at 11:12, a total solar eclipse that is once in a century will appear over New York. All residents are asked to wear special glasses and watch this amazing spectacle together. In the speeding police car, the radio continued to broadcast today's headlines. With the arrival of the solar eclipse, the signal in the car seemed to be interfered with, and it kept making a hissing sound. "You will destroy the entire red light district." Yin Fu shouted angrily at the police officer on the side, his face full of anxiety and anger, and he shuddered every time he thought about David's alienation. Especially the dozens of absentees who were sent home. At this time, 3 days had passed since the incident occurred, and Yin Fu was on his way to the Western Police Station. "Commissioner Yin Fu, you are also the top expert at the New York Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. How can you say such ridiculous things as people turning into monsters?" With a smile on his face, the police officer sitting next to Yin Fu didn't care at all. He received the order from above, no matter what the truth of the matter was. Boom. A huge roar resounded throughout the street, and everyone walking around panicked. Yin Fu saw a stiff-looking man through the window in front of the car, and instantly threw a woman to the ground. The police officer next to him immediately got out of the car and was about to step forward to stop him. "Wait a minute, something's wrong." Yin Fu stared at the dim street at this moment. Because of the arrival of the total solar eclipse, New York at this moment was like a cloud. However, the Phobulers did not pay any attention to Yin Fu's warning. Including the driver, the 2 police officers all rushed out of the car, holding guns and aiming at the strange man with flesh thorns sticking out of his mouth and sucking the blood of passers-by. "Sir, what are you doing?" Roar. With scarlet pupils and pale skin, this vampire that appeared on the block let out a violent roar and rushed towards the 2 policemen. Bang bang bang. Faced with this situation, the 2 policemen fired the triggers in their hands without hesitation. As flames spurted out, all the pedestrians around them screamed. The next moment, under the horrified eyes of everyone, the weirdo with several bullet holes in his body spurted meat strands out of his mouth again and stabbed the neck of one of the policemen fiercely. A policeman emptied the magazine without hesitation. However, he found that it did not seem to have any effect on the monster, and then turned around and ran away. In the car, Yin Fu looked at the absurd scene in front of him and got out of the car in a hurry. After sucking the policeman, the strange man who looked like a vampire rushed towards a passerby who ran by in a panic. Yin Fu quickly looked around and found that there were many people like this among the crowd. Seeing the right opportunity, he hurriedly rushed to the policeman who was lying on the ground lifeless, and found the key to his shackles from his side pocket. Yin Fu took off the handcuffs, turned around and ran away. In the old antique shop, Nora looked at the old man in front of her anxiously. "Why don't you believe me?" Abraham yelled angrily. At this moment, the TV in the store was constantly playing the news of today's turmoil. Nora looked at the vampire flashing past on the movie screen, and her face was extremely pale. She knew the epidemic had completely broken out. "Sir, what should we do?" Jim on the side was crying with regret on his face. "Kill the Blood Ancestor. Blood Ancestor. He is the source of everything. If you kill him, all infected vampires will die." Abraham was determined. He looked through the glass doors and windows of the antique shop and saw the panicked and running crowd outside. He knew that the vampires had found this place. In the somewhat dull antique store, Nola's cell phone rang, and her originally uneasy expression was instantly shaken after seeing the call message. Yin Fu, we're in the Greer Street Antique Store on New York's West Side. After hanging up the phone, Nora looked excited. Jim beside her seemed to have thought of something and seemed to want to run out. However, he was stopped instantly by Abraham. At this moment, the storefront has been covered by black cloth, and they cannot see the specific situation outside. The light through the curtains is extremely dim. They know that it is already afternoon, and the sky is extremely dark due to the solar eclipse. There are vampires everywhere out there now. Abraham looked extremely serious and looked directly at Jim, his meaning self-evident. Jim leaned to the side a little dejectedly. He wanted to find his wife, but he also understood that now was indeed not a good time. Nora on the side was also hesitant. She was worried that Yin Fu would be attacked by monsters on the way here. As midnight fell, a rapid knocking sound was soon heard outside the antique store. Under Abraham's solemn gaze, Nora cautiously walked forward and opened the curtain. There was chaos outside the door. Yin Fu knocked on the store door quickly while constantly looking around. Noticing that Yin Fu was fine, Nora hurriedly opened the door and hugged Yin Fu under Abraham's vigilant eyes. The world has gone completely crazy. After Yin Fu comforted Nora, with a wry smile on his face, he quickly recounted his experiences along the way. It was thrilling. The streets that were originally crowded with people were now sparse and filled with bloodthirsty people. Follow me. After checking Yin Fu, Abraham came to the only secret room in the antique shop and walked in first under the surprised eyes of everyone. The secret room was filled with various hunting tools for large beasts, which made Yin Fu, Nora and others frown. What caused this? Yin Fu frowned and asked anxiously. Blood ancestor, he is the root of everything. Of course, if we want to know the root of everything, we need to get something. Abraham's eyes were empty, as if he was recalling his past memories. All those who have been transformed into vampires can only die by chopping off their heads. Silver swords and sunlight are weapons that can kill them. He slowly took out a box of silver bullets from the drawer and scattered them on the table. Vampire. Yin Fu had a doubtful look on his face. At this moment, he couldn't help but wonder if the old man in front of him was joking with him. Yin Fu, we can only believe him now, Nora said solemnly. Oh, this world is far more mysterious than you think. Abraham's old face was firm and said in a deep voice. I have been hunting that guy for nearly a century, and I know its horror better than you do. They are the darkest and most evil creatures in the world. Since the birth of mankind, they have been hiding in the darkness, feeding on human blood and using humans as eternal carriers. With a hint of deepness on his face, Abraham looked at the glass liquid bottle on his table. His sight also made Yin Fu and others beside him notice this unique heart. This is my wife. Outside a grocery store with flashing lights, several figures in robes walked quickly through the darkness, accompanied by low roars, like wild beasts. Abraham walked at the front, walking towards the grocery store with a determined face, and behind him were Yin Fu and others. Jim looked at a vampire looking over in the dark with fear on his face. His face was pale and his mouth was full of blood. It was obvious that this vampire had just had a feast. With a roar, its figure was like an agile leopard, and it rushed over quickly. However, a flash of sword light flashed, and Abraham actually pulled out a long sword shining with gleaming light from his cane. As everyone marveled, under his gaze, he beheaded the charging vampire with one blow. Oh, my! Yin Fu and others looked at Abraham, a gray-haired old man, in disbelief. His skills were not as strong as his age. As the door of the grocery store opened, Abraham glanced sharply around. He noticed something unusual. Boom! He knocked hard on the shelf. Abraham looked sternly at the two people huddled in the corner. What are you doing hiding here? Old sir, there's a monster out there. A store clerk pointed his catalog to the side in horror. The next moment, Jim at the back of the team suddenly screamed and fell to the ground instantly. A vampire emerged from nowhere and spit out a long flesh thorn, which instantly scratched his hand. Even if he tried to dodge, he still didn't completely dodge it. Yin Fu on the side rushed forward and pulled his friend behind him. Just when the vampire pounced again, a spear instantly penetrated its head. Vasily appeared in front of everyone with an ultraviolet lamp on his back, glanced at the group of people, and paused slightly at Abraham. Are you here to look for weapons too? And Yin Fu's attention has been transferred to Jim. At this time, Jim pulled out the worm from his palm with a look of fear on his face. Vasily on the side also looked solemn, holding the spear in his hand tightly. Knowing Jim must be infected, Yin Fu quickly pulled Jim to a display table and asked him to lie down on it. Operation now. Looking at Nora with a determined face, the two of them quickly selected the tools they needed from the grocery shelf nearby. Abraham tightly grasped the silver crutch in his hand and stared at Jim, who was sweating profusely and terrified. Soon, with the help of two senior medical experts, the squirming bugs were picked out one by one. Jim looked at Yin Fu with a grateful face. And keep giving thanks. Thanks, thanks. There were tears in his eyes. Even though he made such a huge mistake, Yin Fu still didn't give up on him. He had mixed feelings in his heart. Call. Yin Fu slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Under the illumination of the ultraviolet lamp, Jim's injured palm showed no abnormality. Nora on the side also showed a happy expression. However, Abraham's eyes were fixed on Jim's face. Vasily on the side walked up expressionlessly and slowly shined the ultraviolet lamp in his hand towards Jim's face. The scene in front of them made everyone's expressions freeze. Nora covered her mouth with both hands, and tears instantly flowed down her eyes. Looking at everyone's expressions, Jim's face twitched a little. He seemed to realize something, and the joy in his heart disappeared. He slowly took out a mirror from the side and reflected his face. Countless tiny worms crawled slowly along his face. Jim cursed under his breath. Jim, don't give up, we're starting from the beginning. Yin Fu shouted in a deep voice, looking at his former best friend, his heart was filled with pain. Vasily on the side pushed him aside, turned Jim's body around, and lifted up his clothes. Nora closed her eyes in pain, and at this moment, countless tiny worms on Jim's back shuttled under his skin. Yin Fu grabbed his hair fiercely, his whole body looked like crazy. Kill me. Jim put on his clothes, put on a smile on his lips, and looked at his partner pretending to be indifferent. Don't let me become a monster, Yin Fu. And, I'm sorry. If possible, can you help me take care of my wife? With tears in Jim's eyes, he looked at Yin Fu, who looked in pain at this moment. No. Yin Fu closed his eyes and kept repeating one word. But the next moment, boom, there was a gunshot, and everyone looked at Vasily standing with a gun in shock. What are you doing? Yin Fu angrily pushed Vasily against the wall. That guy is dead. Also, didn't you hear his appeal? Vasily looked firmly at Yin Fu, who had a hint of madness in his expression at this moment. Just when Yin Fu couldn't help but punch Vasily in the face, his figure was suddenly pulled away. Now is not the time for infighting. Abraham scolded angrily, looking at Vasily with a hint of appreciation in his eyes. Quote. Yin Fu rubbed his hair fiercely, and was hugged by Nora beside him instantly. You are a good fighter. Abraham stared at Vasily. However, the gunshot just now seemed to have alarmed the vampires running around outside. Roar. With a roar, everyone's attention shifted, and they looked at the vampires who were surrounding them nervously. Suddenly, accompanied by the sound of a brick wall breaking, the wall above the grocery store collapsed instantly, and two vampires fell down, instantly knocking the two clerks on one side to the ground. Abraham and Vasily rushed forward, while Yin Fu and Nora on the side also hurriedly looked for weapons on the shelves. Bang! The glass door shattered instantly, and vampires rushed in one after another. However, the next moment, a strong ultraviolet beam shone on the door, and Vasily held two ultraviolet searchlights in both hands, illuminating the front. Quick, we can't stay here any longer, let's run out first. Abraham suddenly pulled out the silver sword from the vampire's head, panted slightly, and the next moment, he walked out of the door first with the ultraviolet light on his head. However, the scene outside the door made him look depressed. Yin Fu and others who came out of the store also looked at the vampires who seemed to surround everyone with despair. There was a scarlet light in their eyes, blood and flesh flew on both sides of their cheeks, and long flesh thorns were exposed, which looked particularly hideous and terrifying. Abraham's face was extremely solemn, and his eyes slowly looked at a dark corner. Abraham, the old guy is still so sharp. Ihorst, dressed in a neat suit, walked out of the darkness, his eyes flashing scarlet light, and a hideous smile at the corner of his mouth. From a distance, I can already smell the rotten smell on you. Abraham stared at his decades-old opponent in front of him with full solemnity. Today, you and your new helper will be buried here, just like before. Ihorst looked at Vasily holding the ultraviolet searchlight, and slowly swallowed the remaining blood in his mouth. Ha ha. When everyone was a little desperate, Vasily laughed out loud. Today, I am not the only one. Vasily's calmness at this moment made Ihorst, who seemed to have won, suddenly panic. The next moment, as if to confirm Vasily's words, a vampire on the side was blown away like a cannonball. Its head fell to the ground, and under the incredible eyes of everyone, a residual shadow flashed, and a man in a black windbreaker and a western hat appeared in front of them. As soon as he saw this figure, Ihorst's originally ferocious and arrogant face changed instantly, and the whole person turned around, the residual shadow flashed, and disappeared on the spot. Who are you? Abraham looked at Lin Ju with a horrified expression, who had his back turned to everyone at the moment. Even Yin Fu and Nora on the side were shocked and alert. The speed at which Lin Ju suddenly appeared in front of everyone just now shocked them. That is simply not the speed that humans can possess. Now is not the time to discuss this. Lin Ju's eyes were fixed on the direction in which Ihorst was escaping. The next moment, he moved forward to meet the attacking vampire. In order to escape, Ihorst directed these vampires to meet Lin Ju. The next moment, under the shocked eyes of Abraham and others, heads were cut through the sky one after another, and countless flesh thorns were pierced around Lin Ju's body, but they could not even touch the corners of his clothes. Under the weak light, the silver sword shone with gleaming brilliance, like brilliant lightning piercing the dark night. One after another, the hideous and terrifying vampires were killed by Lin Ju's sword. Compared with Abraham's simple and powerful blow, Lin Ju's swordsmanship is much more unpredictable. His thrusts, slashes and slashes are extremely sharp, accompanied by the splatters of blood. It is simply a visual feast. Oh, my God. The vampires were massacred unilaterally, but Yin Fu and Nora had horror on their faces. Even Vasily, who had seen Lin Ju's skills, had a trace of fear in his eyes. The method of killing people like mowing grass makes people shudder, even if these people have become vampires. Quick, keep up. Abraham was not afraid at all, and took the lead in chasing Lin Ju's figure. Just now he secretly illuminated Lin Ju with the ultraviolet lamp in his hand. Yin Fu and others behind him all saw his behavior. Sensing the people chasing behind him, Lin Ju's lips curled up slightly. The next moment, his figure turned into afterimages, his speed soared, and one vampire after another was killed by the silver sword in his hand. As a vampire frantically fled into the distance, the silver sword shot out of his hand instantly penetrated the head. Lin Ju's figure disappeared from the place, appeared in front of the vampire, pulled out the sword suddenly, and then turned into a vampire. Afterimages disappeared into the night. Etc. Abraham couldn't help shouting loudly, but Lin Ju's figure still disappeared into the distance. Hi. Darcy Wades jumped out of the dilapidated street shop instantly, with a vampire following behind her. She rushed out of the store with a frightened face, shouting loudly, and rushed towards Vasily and others. Vasily frowned slightly, jumped past her, and faced the pale figure head-on. The moment he opened his mouth and stretched out the flesh thorn, the spear in his hand came out and penetrated through the vampire's mouth in an instant. Roar! The roar suddenly stopped, and Vasily stepped forward slowly. He stepped heavily on the vampire's head with the soles of his waterproof rubber shoes. As he drew out the spear, he ducked backward slightly to avoid being contaminated by the unknown liquid. Hey, brother, you're really good at it. Daki looked at Vasily with bright eyes. Have you been hiding in the store just now? Vasily frowned and looked at the woman in front of him with long blonde hair and thick smoky makeup. There is no way, there are all these monsters out there. Daki showed a helpless expression, not apologizing at all for not standing up to help just now. Okay, let's get out of here. Abraham's eyes still stayed at the place where Lin Ju disappeared, his eyes full of meaning. Soon, everyone returned to Abraham's basement again. Wow, Daki looked at a huge crossbow placed on the wall in amazement. That's what was used to hunt vampires. Abraham's eyes darkened slightly. What happened tonight was far beyond his expectation. The appearance of that mysterious Asian man made an idea take root in his brain. He looked at Vasily with a hint of urgency in his expression. Do you know the person just now? Vasily's eyes flickered and he nodded. I just met that guy too, and his target is also the blood ancestor. Strange, why have I never met him in the past years? He has the same speed as a high-level vampire, but he is not a vampire. Abraham had a look of disbelief on his face. He told me that the blood ancestor seems to be hiding in the sewers. Vasily said softly. ! Abraham's eyes burst out with dazzling light, and his whole body was shocked for an instant, as if he had heard some kind of huge surprise. Walk. After saying that, under everyone's surprised eyes, he just leaned on the crutch in his hand and left the house. Nora grabbed the impatient old man, with a solemn look on his face. Are you not going to kill that ancestor of vampires now? We can't let him get away. Abraham, who had always been calm and composed, seemed extremely excited the moment he learned the location of the Blood Lord. He even temporarily let go of his thoughts about Lin Ju. Madman. Daki curled her lips. She couldn't understand the old man. She thought it was normal behavior for ordinary people to run away from those bloodthirsty monsters. Me and you together, Vasily said solemnly. He is kind-hearted and righteous, and he has always wanted to end this disaster, otherwise he would not still be here. At the same time, this was also Lin Ju's arrangement. Although he knew that the blood ancestor was hidden in the sewers, he didn't know how to find it. This was also the reason why he let Vasily, accidentally, meet Abraham and others. He wanted them to follow the original plot and find the location of the blood ancestor as soon as possible. In order to shorten the time, he even directly revealed the hidden address of the blood ancestor. Lin Ju wants to get rid of it once and for all. In the Red Hook district of New York, a figure slowly walked to a heavily guarded building in front of the building. He looked at the carved stone tablet next to the building. Stoneheart Group. Lin Ju looked calm and walked straight into the building. 2 security guards in suits stopped him. Who? One of the white men with Chinese characters shouted in a deep voice, but in the next moment, their necks were pinched instantly. Under the strong force, Lin Ju directly lifted the 2 burly men above his head and looked at them with a smile. Stoneheart Group employees rioting in the lobby. I want to see Eldridge. Boom. There was a piercing gunshot, and the 2 security personnel fell to the ground instantly. Lin Ju's figure turned into afterimages. In the blink of an eye, he came to the side of an employee who secretly fired a concealed gun. With a lightning-like kick, the man's figure was like a cannonball, flying backwards instantly and hitting the marble wall of the Stoneheart building heavily. Under the horrified eyes of everyone, cracks appeared in the area where the man hit, and blood spilled on the wall. The whole man seemed to be dying. Lin Ju's eyes passed over the people who looked horrified and frightened. At this time, no one dared to point a gun at him. I wonder what this distinguished guest is doing today. The words sounded from a speaker on the top of the Stoneheart building. Lin Ju looked at a camera and instantly understood what Eldridge was thinking at this time. Facing such an unfathomable visitor like Lin Ju, he, who was always cautious, did not even dare to show his face. This made Lin Ju feel a little funny. You know, Eldridge dared to face the blood ancestor, a bloodthirsty monster who regarded human life as an ant. He even dared to contradict the blood ancestor and ask for benefits. At this time, facing Lin Ju, who is also a human, he didn't even dare to show his face. Looking at the security personnel who seemed to have received some kind of notification and dispersed, Lin Ju did not take the initiative to find the controller of the Shixin group. Do you really think the blood ancestor will satisfy your desire for immortality? Lin Ju looked at the camera above the hall and said calmly. Do you know the blood ancestor? Eldridge's tone changed instantly. He suddenly thought of Lin Ju's extraordinary speed just now, and his voice froze slightly. He was severely injured by me. I don't know where he has gone now. I believe you have guessed something. He probably hasn't contacted you for a while. Lin Ju had a look of determination on his face, not caring how shocked Eldridge would be when these words were spoken. Did you severely injure the blood ancestor? Eldridge's tone was laced with shock. Slowly opening his sleeves, Lin Ju cut open his finger under the illumination of the camera, and a drop of pale, crystal-clear blood slowly dripped to the ground. What? The loudspeaker in the hall suddenly heard rapid breathing. Eldridge, one more thing I want to tell you is that I am not a vampire. Lin Ju smiled slightly. He knew that Eldridge's biggest desire had always been to become a monster, which had always made him hesitate. Now that he was a human being, he had white blood, and the effect was much more shocking than that of the blood ancestor. Really? A slightly respectful voice came over the radio. Take this gentleman to the top floor. Two security guards jumped out from nowhere with a hint of nervousness on their faces, leading Lin Ju towards the top floor. With the sound of the elevator arriving, the specially made alloy door slowly opened, and Lin Ju walked expressionlessly into the large flat floor decorated like a hospital ward. On a white bed, Eldridge looked at Lin Ju with an extremely haggard face, dying. Lin Ju's eyes paused at the ultraviolet searchlight beside Eldridge's bed. Lin Ju couldn't help but chuckle, and then he approached with a calm face and faced the ultraviolet light directly. The purple light hit his dark windbreaker, flashing with scorching traces of light, which were the white blood that had been spattered when he killed the vampire. How is it possible? How did you do it? Eldridge tried to sit up, but he was so weak that he had no choice but to lie down again. Seeing the longing look in the eyes of this extremely old man, Lin Ju lamented that sometimes people are scarier than monsters. As the behind-the-scenes controller of the Stoneheart Group, Eldridge can be said to rule over everything with one hand, and it is precisely because of his help that the blood ancestor spread the epidemic so unscrupulously. He slowly took out a bottle filled with white liquid from his clothes, and handed it to Eldridge under his excited eyes. What do you want? Looking at the bottle of white and dirty blood, Eldridge's eyes burst out with dazzling light, and his whole body was trembling. This bottle of white blood was collected by Lin Ju from killing vampires in the sewers a few days ago. The quantity is large, but the effect is small. This is also the secret hidden by Abraham. It is the fundamental reason why he can survive to this day and maintain his lifespan. Lin Ju also tried his own blood, and the effect was better than the white blood obtained by ordinary vampires, but it was not as good as the blood ancestor. This is one of the hidden functions of the ancestor's body. I have a way to get you out of the blood ancestor's control and get a steady stream of white blood. Lin Ju raised a smile on his lips and looked at the old man in front of him, whose face was flushed with excitement. What do I need to do? Eldridge was categorical. Lin Ju did not reply immediately, and handed the white blood to the old man. With trembling hands, Eldridge slowly dripped the white blood into his eyes. After dripping all the blood, he closed his eyes tremblingly. Seeing his old bloodless face regaining its rosy color instantly, Lin Ju couldn't help but feel a flash of surprise. Why is the effect of so many drops so poor? Eldridge suddenly opened his eyes, with a trace of confusion on his face. And his reaction was also within Lin Ju's expectation. After all, a small bottle of white blood is not worth a drop of the blood ancestor, which is really unreasonable. Do you know how this bottle of white blood was obtained? They are extracted from the white blood in those vampires. Those monsters can extract this kind of thing. Eldridge's eyes lit up, but Lin Ju didn't care at all what this message would bring to Eldridge. He just looked at Eldridge with a smile on his face. Not a few seconds later, Eldridge suddenly narrowed his eyes slightly. Blood ancestor. Can it also be refined? Haha, you are worthy of being the master of the Shixin group. You can understand a lot of things very easily. Eldridge stared blankly at the mysterious Asian man in front of him. A crazy thought flashed through his mind. Thinking of the feeling of being abandoned by the Blood Lord before, the thought in his heart became more and more difficult. Restraint. I need you to do me a favor. What? Let the blood ancestor be unable to escape from the sewer to the ground. Lin Ju looked directly at Eldridge, his voice carrying an unquestionable meaning. However, Eldridge was not afraid at all. Feeling alive again at this moment, he slowly got up from the hospital bed and stared at Lin Ju with burning eyes. Why do you have white blood again? He didn't give an answer right away. Instead of draining the blood ancestors, he was more interested in becoming someone like Lin Ju. Greed is truly the original sin of mankind. With a smile on his lips, Lin Ju walked slowly to sit next to Eldridge. I am not a human being. I am a being who judges all evil. All evil power can be transformed into my power. Can I? A strange color burst out in Eldridge's eyes, and he stared at the Asian man in front of him. You are just an ordinary person, and you still dare to covet the power of God. You can think of me as an angel. completely different from the angel of the blood ancestor. Lin Ju smiled mysteriously, which made Modric's face turn red. His decisive rejection made his face look a little unsightly. I can give you a chance to become a human and live forever, but whether you can grasp it or not depends on you. Lin Ju looked at the old man in front of him expressionlessly, not afraid of the medical staff behind him who put a gun to his head. Slowly waving to his men to put down their guns, the angry expression on Eldridge's face quickly changed and was replaced by a trace of enthusiasm. Under Lin Juman's smiling gaze, he nodded heavily. Yin Fu looked extremely ugly. He took his son with one hand and came to Abraham. I also need to go. Just today, at dawn, he went out to look for his son Zack. Just when he arrived, he happened to encounter his love rival who turned into a vampire and attacked Zack. Hesitantly kills the man who turned into a vampire. Looking at his frightened son and the panic-stricken Red Hook district, he knew he couldn't sit still and wait for death. Abraham didn't reply, just touched Zack's head, then silently wiped the silver sword in his hand, and looked at the clock. There were still about 2 hours before noon. Boom! The door to the basement suddenly opened, and Daki rushed in, followed by Vasily. Apparently, they went out early in the morning and did something unknown. Daki looked very angry and looked around at the people around him. Sorry, I am also responsible for the turmoil in this city. After revealing that she had been hired by the Stoneheart Group to hack into the government network and shut down communications in the Red Hook district, she took Vasily back home early in the morning, only to find that all her rewards had been robbed by her partners. Now she was penniless and realized that it was probably a punishment from God. She regretted it extremely. Along the way, she saw dilapidated street shops, dead children, and countless missing person notices. She didn't expect that her behavior would bring such a huge disaster to people. Without the network communication system, many people would be devoured by vampires without knowing it. As long as the blood ancestor is killed, everything will return to normal. Abraham's eyes scanned the people with different expressions one by one. At the subway entrance in the center of the Red Hook district, Abraham was walking at the front, looking at the tunnel that was usually filled with people, but now it was deserted, and several people looked at each other. This is the nearest entrance they analyzed based on the sewer distribution map provided by Vasily. Without any hesitation, Abraham walked in first. At the same time, security personnel from the Stoneheart Group appeared above the sewers in the entire Red Hook district and began a series of construction reinforcements. On the top floor of the Stoneheart building, Eldridge stared at the block outside the building. At this moment, his face was rosy and he looked full of energy. Lin Ju fed a drop of his own white blood to Eldridge. Unexpectedly, the effect was unexpectedly good. Although it was still not as good as the blood ancestor, but thanks to the small bottle of white blood he had drunk before, the effect was amazing. That's almost it. Mr. Lin, what happens next is up to you. Eldridge looked at the sewer entrance outside the Stoneheart building and the security personnel who were working on it. His eyes seemed a little deep. Dark underground passage. The underground passages in Red Hook are connected to the city's sewers. The two exist like bomb shelters during wartime, and they communicate with each other. Abraham looked deeply at the rickety figure in the darkness ahead. Behind him, Yin Fu and others were holding spears or shields, following nervously behind him. Roar! A roar like a wild beast resounded in the empty tunnel. The vampire instantly rushed to the wall on one side, climbed along the wall, and rushed towards a few people. Because it was not a frontal attack, Abraham's silver sword passed by him, and the ferocious tentacles of flesh and blood gnawed away at Yin Fu and others. Vasily, who was mixed in the crowd, reacted the fastest. While pushing Yin Fu away, the spear in his hand instantly pierced the vampire's chest. Tilting his head to the side to avoid the ferocious flesh thorns, Vasily kicked the vampire hard and knocked it off his spear. The next moment, the long sword in Abraham's free hand flashed a light and shadow, and instantly cut off the vampire's head under the sword. Looking at the lifeless vampire, Yin Fu tried his best to calm the wildly beating heart in his chest. However, before a few people could relax a little, roars came one after another from the depths of the tunnel, and ferocious figures loomed in the faint light. Abraham's old face flashed with determination, and the silver sword in his hand was pressed against his chest. At this moment, he seemed to have become the young man who was fighting vampires again. One after another, the rickety figures finally met the crowd. The spears and shields cooperated with each other, and the 4 vampires that rushed towards them were all stopped outside the crowd. With a purple beam of light instantly illuminating the dark cave, Vasily carried the ultraviolet lamp and shined it directly. The bodies of all the vampires who were illuminated instantly burned and they hid backwards. With the help of this control-like effect, the weapons in everyone's hands stabbed each other, and in the blink of an eye, the 4 vampires died tragically under everyone's attacks. Roar! A low roar came from the depths of the tunnel, and Abraham's eyes froze slightly. This sound was different. He knew the blood ancestor very well and even heard a hint of weakness in this voice. With a look of urgency on his face, the next moment he jumped out of the team and rushed towards the dark tunnel. What is he doing? Yin Fu looked at Abraham's actions and subconsciously exclaimed. Vasily on the side remained silent and followed directly. At this moment, everyone no longer paid attention to the possible sudden dangers around them and rushed in the direction of Abraham. As they entered the dark tunnel, the number of vampires increased. However, this time they were well prepared and irradiated ultraviolet lights around them, preventing these vampires from approaching. Until he came to a narrow cave, Abraham dived into it without hesitation. The cave was too small, so the burly Vasily chose to stay at the end. Until he finally got into the cave, the vampire behind him lost the illumination of the ultraviolet light and rushed over instantly. With some anxiety on his face, Vasily looked nervously at the pale figure climbing quickly behind him. He quickly grabbed the ultraviolet lamp on one side, but he was horrified to find that the ultraviolet lamp was malfunctioning. He climbed forward hard, but because he was too tall, he had no time to turn around in the small cave. At this moment, he couldn't care about the vampire attacking behind him. Looking behind him from time to time, he struggled to climb forward. Daki, who was in front of him, was quickly caught up by her. However, her speed was relatively slow, which also forced Vasily to move forward quickly. Hurry up, Darcy. Vasily looked anxious. The next moment, he saw the vampire behind him who was less than half a meter away from him. A ferocious smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The sides slowly spread out, and a tentacle of flesh and blood was about to eject out subconsciously. Just when Vasily was a little desperate, the next moment, the vampire suddenly let out a scream, and then suddenly moved away from Vasily, as if it was instantly pulled away by something behind him. Soon, he climbed out of the cave and stared at the dark cave. Vasily's eyes flashed slightly. Deep in the dark tunnel, accompanied by harsh roars, countless sword lights flashed, and vampires fell to the ground one after another. After casually twisting off a vampire's head, Lin Ju looked into the small cave with a smile on his lips. Roar. The vampire had no time to struggle, and in an instant 3 spears penetrated its chest, neck and head. Yin Fu suddenly pulled out the spear and staggered slightly. He was still a little unfamiliar with the use of the spear. Vasily, on the other hand, was much more skilled. The moment he pulled out the spear, he swung the blood on it to the ground. He looked so cool and unrestrained, which made Daki's eyes shine brightly. Nora followed in the middle of the team, holding a shield and rushing forward from time to help her teammates block the attacks of the flesh thorns. In a short period of time, the tacit understanding between them has risen to several levels. Ehorst. The low words echoed in the empty cave. Abraham looked solemnly at the darkness ahead, holding the silver sword tightly in his right hand. He smelled the familiar smell of decay. Abraham, my master has spared you time and time again, but I didn't expect you to be like the hyena. This time you want to persecute your friends again. A ferocious smile appeared at the corner of Eichhorst's mouth, but his cold eyes were looking at Abraham's side. He did not see the familiar figure. His heart was hanging in his throat and slowly fell, and instead he looked at the prey. Such a playful gaze. Jung. The long sword was instantly unsheathed, and Abraham stepped forward suddenly, slashing towards Ehorst with a swift sword. However, an afterimage flashed by, and a flesh thorn slid towards Abraham in an instant. Fortunately, Abraham's figure was suddenly held aside by Vasily behind him. The ferocious flesh thorns flowed with unknown mucus and passed by them. Bang bang bang. The next moment, the dark cave was filled with fire. It was Yin Fu who took out his gun and fired wildly at Ehorst, who appeared. Roar. With a ferocious roar, the moment Eshorst withdrew his flesh thorns, he hurriedly rushed into the dark cave. As the bullets were fired from behind, his body staggered slightly, fell to the ground, and then stood up again. He ran towards the depths of the tunnel like crazy. He never expected that these people had guns, and they actually took a long time to use them, as if they were waiting for him. No, they were waiting for the blood ancestor. His face was twitching, and the place where the bullet was embedded kept making a sizzling sound, as if a soldering iron was constantly burning his flesh and blood. Silver bullet. Eichhorst rushed in the direction of his master with a look of fear on his face. Behind him, Abraham and others were once again surrounded by a group of vampires. With the ultraviolet light lighting up the entire cave again, all the vampires were like frightened beasts. With an anxious look on his face, Abraham rushed in the direction where Eichhorst fled, followed closely by Yin Fu and others. Listening to the movement behind him, Eichhorst gritted his teeth. However, just as he was about to enter the cave where the blood ancestor was hiding, a majestic voice suddenly sounded in his mind. The next moment, his eyes glowed with scarlet light, and his pupils instantly dilated, silently receiving the message from the blood ancestor. His eyes flashed slightly, and then he changed direction and drilled into the narrow cave on one side. Behind him, Abraham and others came to the place where he originally stood. The ultraviolet searchlight illuminated the remaining traces of white blood. After noticing the direction of the white blood, Abraham was about to rush towards the small cave. At this moment, a low roar came from the other side of the passage, accompanied by roars one after another. It was the blood ancestor summoning the vampires hidden in the surrounding caves. With a look of surprise on his face, Abraham changed his target without hesitation. His hatred for Eichhorst was no match for his murderous intention towards the blood ancestor. Roar! The violent roar shook the entire cave, and everyone felt that their minds were dull, followed by intense pain. Abraham held his head in pain, and looked at several people slowly moving towards him from the corner of his eye. A vampire who is approached by others. Everyone staggered into a group, using shields to block in front of them. They were under mental attack at this moment and could not fight back at all. The ground began to tremble slightly, and under the extremely strange low roar of the blood ancestor, the buzzing sound continued to shake the entire underground passage. Just when everyone was about to lose their support, the ferocious roars suddenly stopped. Abraham and others were refreshed. The next moment, everyone quickly picked up their spears, and with the mottled white blood swaying on the cave wall, the surroundings were shocked. The vampire who came was instantly killed by several people. The ultraviolet light emitting a purple halo shone in the dark cave, making the vampires coming from behind afraid to approach. Abraham rushed in the direction where the blood ancestor roared. Yin Fu and others behind him were following closely behind him while confronting the vampires behind them. Snap! The water droplets above the cave ceiling slowly fell into the small puddles in the cave. With the patter of footsteps, Abraham walked into the cave with a solemn expression. He saw the simple sarcophagus in the center at a glance. Yin Fu and others behind him also had solemn faces. All they knew about the blood ancestor was Abraham's oral description, and they had never seen it with their own eyes. Thinking of the previous Eichhorst, they were even more vigilant. The strength of Eichhorst alone made them feel frightened, let alone its owner. Abraham held the silver sword in his hand, his face solemn, and slowly leaned towards the sarcophagus. Boom! The next moment, under the horrified eyes of everyone, a huge thing suddenly jumped out of the sarcophagus. The silver sword in his hand stabbed hard at the approaching black shadow. Abraham's eyes widened angrily, and in the next moment, the silver sword flew backwards with him. He was actually slapped by the blood ancestor and flew out. Along with the strong fishy wind, he turned into an afterimage. The blood ancestor rushed towards Yin Fu and others. The next moment, the ultraviolet lamp instantly illuminated the entire cave. With a violent roar, the blood ancestor shrouded in black robe instantly appeared in front of Vasily holding the ultraviolet lamp. The ferocious flesh thorns bit into Vasily's neck like lightning. Fark! With a loud shout, the spears in the hands of Yin Fu and others on the side also stabbed forward in panic, while Vasily also dodged backwards. However, the thick flesh thorn still continued unabated, biting towards his neck. In the midst of the lightning and flint, an afterimage flashed, and the sword light was like lightning. The thick flesh thorn fell to the ground instantly, and the blood ancestor's scarlet pupils looked at the Asian man who appeared in front of Vasily in shock. The next moment, a lightning-like kick hit his chest hard. At the same time that the blood ancestor flew backwards, Lin Ju threw the long sword in his hand violently, and the light and shadow flashed, instantly penetrating the blood ancestor's chest, and with great force, he wrapped his burly body and nailed it to the wall. Above. Roar. A huge roar resounded throughout the cave. White blood spilled out of the blood ancestor's mouth and he let out a deafening roar. The entire cave trembled. Abraham and others covered their ears one after another, showing ferocious faces and looking in great pain. However, there was one person walking towards the blood ancestor unhurriedly. You. The blood ancestor's pupils flashed with shock, and the broken flesh thorn grew again, and then nibbled away at Lin Ju at a very fast speed. But Lin Ju's reaction speed was not slow either. The moment he dodged sideways, he suddenly pulled out the long sword from his chest and slashed towards his head. The black robe swept across, but the blood ancestor gave up the attack and turned into afterimages and rushed to one side, followed closely by Lin Ju. As the blood lord stopped roaring, everyone finally came to their senses. Abraham staggered up from the ground and looked at Lin Ju's chasing figure with excitement on his face. You must kill him. The old words echoed throughout the cave. As the sewer cover of a factory in Red Hook district made a loud collision, the security guards of the Stoneheart group above were all surprised. They set up their guns one by one and stared at the violently undulating sewer cover. At this time, it has a special device that fixes it in the surrounding land to prevent it from being lifted. As a violent roar came from the sewer entrance, the security guards all looked at each other. In the sewer, the figure of the blood ancestor fell heavily to the ground. White blood continued to flow from the corners of his mouth. The originally thick flesh thorns had been chopped off again by Lin Ju. Roar. Deprivation. An invisible force instantly enveloped the body of the blood ancestor. Feeling the powerful force emerging from his body, Lin Ju's body underwent some kind of transformation. The strength of his struggle under his feet became weaker and weaker, and his aura became stronger and stronger. How dare you steal my power? Like a beast swallowing followed by a violent roar, the blood ancestor's scarlet pupils stared intently at the Asian man with one foot on his chest. Stealing. This is deprivation. This is your punishment for swallowing countless lives in your long years. Lin Ju's eyes flashed with light golden light. At this moment, his aura was so strong that even the vampires summoned by the blood ancestor did not dare to come close. Poof. As the spear instantly penetrated the head of a vampire, Vasily appeared in front of Lin Ju, followed by Abraham who was supported by Yin Fu and others. He looked at the blood ancestor at Lin Ju's feet with a shocked expression, his face flushed, and his whole body seemed excited. He pulled out the silver sword from the crutch in his hand, and Lin Ju did not stop him at all. Just like that, he watched Abraham cut off the head of the blood ancestor. Roar. With a dull roar, all the vampires swarmed over. Even when Vasily and others held up ultraviolet searchlights, they rushed over like crazy. The steaming smoke enveloped the tunnel, and Lin Ju slowly retracted his feet. Under his current extraordinary perception, the blood ancestor had lost his life. Abraham stared blankly at the blood ancestor whose head was beheaded, but soon, a trace of astonishment flashed in his eyes, and he suddenly discovered that the vampires around him were not dead. Lin Ju's eyes hurriedly passed over the fallen head of the blood ancestor, his eyes flickering slightly. The next moment, under the gaze of Vasily and others, his figure disappeared out of thin air. Where did he go? Yin Fumin shouted in disbelief, and Nora beside him kept looking around, but Lin Ju was nowhere to be seen. Abraham's eyes were fixed on the broken body of the blood ancestor, looking at the ferocious-looking head, and he pierced it with his sword again, accompanied by the sizzling sound of flames burning flesh. This is impossible. Abraham was a little lost, while Yin Fu and Nora on the side also came to their senses. Kill the blood ancestor. Why aren't these vampires dead? As the gasoline spilled, small flames instantly enveloped the remains of the blood ancestor. Until the flames were extinguished, Abraham reluctantly was helped away by Yin Fu and others as he looked at the charred land. After a long time, there was a strange noise from the cave, and Ashurst staggered to the place where the blood ancestor was reduced to ashes, his eyes flashing with scarlet light. He slowly came to a rock wall and gently stretched his fingers in. A blood-red worm followed his fingers and slowly crawled onto his palm. The figure turned into afterimages, and Ihorst disappeared into the cave. The dimensional node changes and returns to the main world. In the quiet bar, Lin Ju stood up from the sofa. At this moment, all the injuries on his body were healed, and he looked full of energy. This renewed energy made Emily, who was stunned, couldn't help but let out a soft cry. From her perspective, Lin Ju's body trembled slightly, and then the whole person looked energetic and weird. "I'm okay, Emily." A confident smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Lin Ju was no longer what he used to be. He looked at the transparent light curtain that appeared out of thin air. Lin Ju. Dimension points. 130 obtained by changing the plot. Natal talent. Dimension deprivation. Ability. Eternal life. Body of the ancestor Archangel. Disabled. Frowning slightly, Lin Heng looked at his ancestor's body and quickly recalled the things he ignored in the Blood Tribe series. Archangel. Subconsciously, with a thought, the scarlet cover of the film and television series appeared in front of him like a dimensional door. It was still the scary-looking cover, and a piece of information quickly flowed through Lin Ju's mind. He instantly understood that he could return to the world of the vampires, where there seemed to be more secrets waiting for him to explore. His eyes flashed slightly, but Lin Ju did not decide immediately, because he needed to reaccumulate the energy to enter another dimension through judging sins. At the same time, a thought came to his mind, and a transparent list appeared in front of him. The first one is a bottle of white liquid. Angel's blood. Contains unparalleled vitality, which can quickly repair body damage and increase lifespan at the same time. Redeem points. 50. This bottle was apparently accumulated by Lin Ju while killing vampires in the sewers. Of course, a small part of it was given to Eldridge, and the rest appeared in his exchange list. The experiment failed and cannot be directly brought to the real world. Look at the second exchange item. Pure silver sword. High purity silver sword. Redemption value. 10. Lin Ju didn't look at the following series in detail. They were all things he prepared in the vampire world. With a thought, he closed the exchange list. The only valuable white blood had no effect on him. 50 points of dimensional energy is simply a waste. You must know that the first anti-worm body he redeemed at that time only cost 30 points. What's more, he can provide this kind of white blood himself, and the effect is even much stronger. Lin Ju slowly sorted out the plot he had changed. In the dark, he felt that he could not kill the blood ancestor, but he believed that he would not be able to do anything. He had deprived that guy of all his power. Even if he was resurrected later, he would face Quinlan, the son of the blood ancestor, is probably helpless. After sorting out his gains, Lin Ju could only sigh that the once elusive ability of immortality could be obtained so easily. Lin Ju could only sigh that this was a complete surprise. At the same time, thanks to the improvement of dimensional rules, the ability to live forever is different from blood ancestors who need to change their bodies. The increase brought about by the complete deprivation of the ancestor's body also made Lin Ju's physical strength nearly doubled. Forest. Emily looked at Lin Ju, who was bowing his head strangely and didn't know what he was thinking. "You recruit me to serve, and I will guard the bar your father left for you on your behalf." Lin Ju raised his head and looked at the young and beautiful girl in front of him, with a confident smile on his face. Early in the morning, the sun was exceptionally bright, shining on the uneven bluestone road of Wallier Street. Pedestrians with hurried expressions walked on the street. Lin Ju suddenly opened the curtains of the bar. At this moment, he was dressed in the clothes of a waiter and shuttled between the bars, arranging the goods on them. "Lin, why did you get up so early? And what about you?" Emily slowly walked downstairs and looked at Lin Ju, who was diligently cleaning the bar with a stunned expression. "You advanced my salary for 1 month in advance and provided accommodation, so of course I have to start work in advance." Lin Ju smiled and looked full of energy. The sunlight hit his extremely handsome face, making the picture appear bright and warm. Emily tried her best to suppress the excitement in her heart and rushed into the studio to change her clothes. As the owner of a bar, she cannot be less efficient than the waiter. Soon, the two figures shuttled through the bar, sorting out everything from last night. As the door opened, the neighbors who had been waiting outside poured into the small bar. Laughter filled the bar again. If it was normal, Emily might have been busy for a while, but now Emily was no longer alone. Hey, Lin, you went to work at Emily's bar. A big man with a long beard looked at Lin Ju with amazement as he shuttled among the people, constantly passing the wine glass. Lin Ju smiled slightly and nodded to the man who had helped him. Lin, it seems that you are planning to help Emily. What a blessing. Dam's uneven beard seemed to have not been taken care of for a long time. It was fluffy and fluffy. His whole face was beaming with excitement, and his hands were constantly swaying from side to side, looking extremely excited. Lin Ju, who was sitting opposite, waved his hand helplessly, signaling the big man in front of him not to be so excited. Hey Lin, I believe you can defeat the motorcycle gangs with your Chinese kung fu. No wonder he was so excited. When he was robbed and he was in despair, Lin Ju was like a god descending to earth. He subdued 3 knife-wielding gangsters with his bare hands. His thin body was able to subdue 3 strong men. This in his eyes, it was simply unbelievable, second only to the Dark Knight, Batman. Of course, he had never seen how Batman punished evildoers. I'll give you a task. As long as you complete it, I'll give you this number, and we can even cooperate for a long time in the future. Lin Ju's eyes narrowed slightly, and he couldn't help but float one hand in front of Dam, making a gesture of counting money. Dam's eyes were wide open, shining with a strange light, like a big 32-watt light bulb, but he still didn't reply. The next moment, Lin Ju's collar was pulled up and dragged out instantly. Lin Ju, who had been resisting subconsciously, noticed the breath behind him and instantly let a small hand pull him away from Dam's dining table. Emily stared with big round eyes. How can you dare to drink with customers on your first day at work? Looking at the angry girl in front of him, Lin Ju raised his hands above his head in a gesture of surrender, with a look of fear on his face. This funny posture made Emily laugh instantly, and made the young students who were secretly looking at her look at her. As night fell, Emily's bistro became sparse, and the last few guests left their tables. Lin Ju was like a whirlwind, shuttling between the wine tables, taking care of various things quickly and efficiently. This made Emily, who was freeing up her hands to organize the bar, feel warm in her heart. Maybe I should have hired someone a long time ago. Emily stared at Lin Ju's busy figure and murmured to herself, unable to suppress the smile on her lips. As the faint yellow lights of the tavern went out, Wallier Street fell into silence. After a long time, the door of Emily's tavern slowly opened. A figure tiptoed out of the shop and locked the door of the tavern. At this time, Lin Ju was wearing a black windbreaker, a dark mask on his face, and even his hands were wearing black leather gloves. The package is tight. Now he can almost be regarded as a non-human existence. To punish evil and promote good, some hidden measures must be taken. This world is not as simple as the DC universe. The murderous Batman, the gods of the old era, and the chaos next door are also Star City and Central City, as well as various alien creatures. As an ordinary person, Lin Ju can get a bit of unusual information from newspapers, even if the government tries its best to cover it up. One can only imagine how chaotic the world is. District 24, compared to Wallier Street falling into a quiet night, it is much noisier here. I must kill that Asian guy. For the first time, it's not me hitting someone else, but someone else hitting me. A white man with yellow hair and a leather jacket couldn't help shouting loudly. He was surrounded by a group of men and women wearing leather jackets with colorful makeup on their faces. Haha, I've heard about that guy. I heard that he likes to be nosy and likes to help the weak. Just him, he thinks he is the Dark Knight. Even that stinky bat would not dare to offend us bikers so unscrupulously. That's right, if he comes, I will be the first to step forward and break his neck. The bald man with thick muscles bulging all over his body took a swig of vodka and roared ferociously. His words also attracted a group of gangsters around to cheer. When the bald man, whose self-esteem was satisfied, was about to take another sip of wine, his wanton laughter suddenly stopped, and everyone looked at him in shock. However, the scene they saw now made their souls wander. They saw a slender and mysterious man wearing a mask standing behind the bald man, holding his thick neck with one hand, and under the incredulous eyes of everyone, he pulled the man away. Lift up slowly. The huge force on his neck made the bald man's face turn red, and he roared hoarsely. The next moment, he whipped out the sharp blade at his waist and stabbed the person behind him. However, a hand grabbed his knife-wielding wrist. Accompanied by a crisp sound of bone cracking, the sound echoed through the street corner. The bald man let out a miserable scream. Listening to the high decibel sound, Lin Ju's mouth hidden under the mask slightly curled up. Now he once again faced the muscular man who usually felt a little troublesome, and he seemed to be able to do so with ease. The strength of the man was like a baby in his hands. "Who are you? Put him down quickly." A young gangster gathered in the middle of the motorcycle gang took the lead in shouting. He smashed the wine bottle in his hand on the table and raised the broken glass edge to point at Lin Ju. Other members of the motorcycle gang who reacted on the side also took out iron rods or long knives, and surrounded Lin Ju one by one. "You are the only ones who know how to bark." Lin Juia lowered his voice and stared at the motorcycle gang members who slowly gathered around. Next moment, buzz buzz, a huge low sound with strange frequency emanated from Lin Ju's body. A gangster who was about to attack from behind instantly fell to the ground, like dominoes. Everyone fell to the ground, holding their heads in their hands, with expressions of pain on their faces. However, even if they covered their ears tightly, they could not stop the strange sound from entering their minds. Ah! In an instant, screams came one after another from the street corner, mixed with the buzzing sound of Lin Ju. The bald man in Lin Ju's hand, who was the closest person to him, fainted instantly. With a slight force with one hand, and with a crisp sound of bone cracking, the bald man's body was thrown aside by Lin Ju. The Blood Lord's high-frequency sound attack was not something ordinary people could withstand. Looking at the gangster who fell to the ground in pain, Lin Ju slowly walked forward. With the emergence of power in his body, Lin Ju increased the frequency of his sound waves again. In the next moment, all the motorcycle gangs were foaming at the mouth, and some even fainted and were awakened by the pain again. Lin Ju came to a young man with yellow hair and a ferocious face, and kicked him in the neck casually. The afterimage flashed, and the man's neck suddenly protruded backward, and the whole person stopped struggling instantly, and so on, one after another, until the end one person also died tragically at his feet. Boom! Lin Ju only felt a pain in his back and was startled in his heart. Gunshots rang out one after another in the neighborhood, and his figure turned into afterimages and disappeared here. After a long time, dozens of men in suits quickly rushed to where the biker gang members were lying. A tall man with a double-door body slowly stared at a young man whose throat was crushed under his feet. "Boss, who is that guy?" The words rang in his ears, but the man ignored them and slowly leaned over. The position he was standing at this time was exactly where Lin Ju was originally. He touched the remaining drop of white liquid on the floor tiles and sniffed it gently on the tip of his nose. A trace of solemnity flashed across the man's face. Today's morning report. Last night, a serious injury incident occurred in District 24. The identity of the two forces fighting this time is unknown, and the other is the recently famous motorcycle gang in Gotham East District. The death toll in this incident was 23. Please residents in District 24 to take safety precautions. The police have made a preliminary investigation into this incident, and the current results are that it was not the Dark Knight. Quote. At this moment, everyone in the bar was watching the news reports on TV in astonishment. Great, those guys finally have someone to deal with them. I don't know who shouted out first, and the shouts one after another resounded all around. I don't know when the motorcycle gang frequently showed up, causing chaos in Wallier Street, which was originally relatively peaceful. As regulars at Emily's Tavern, everyone is a relatively law-abiding existence, and they have long hated this. But what is said is that the police in Gotham are, needless to say, completely unreliable. I can only pray every day that the Dark Knight can open his eyes and take a look at their small corner of Gotham. Fortunately, God opened his eyes, and someone finally took action against those motorcycle gangs who do evil all day long. Looked excited and found Emily, who was sorting the shelves at this time. Emily, where's Lynn? Brother damn, won't you ask him to stand up for you again? Emily frowned tightly, trying hard to show anger on her delicate little face, but unfortunately her innocent and immature face was not deterrent at all. No, Emily, since Lynn helped me teach those guys a lesson last time, they still don't dare to provoke me. Dan touched his head and looked at Emily with some embarrassment. He didn't expect that Emily would know that he had been helped by Lin Ju. Lynn is my employee and will be mine from now on. You can no longer ask him to do dangerous things. Emily had a small face, and her fair face looked as transparent as white porcelain under the sunlight. Ha! Dan grabbed his messy hair and left the bar in embarrassment. He went shopping. He might not be back until noon. Emily's words echoed behind him, and Dan suddenly smiled brightly and kept bowing to thank Emily. In District 29, not far from Wallier Street, in a beer processing factory, Lin Ju was wearing overalls and a beret on his head. He looked at the big man in front of him with a smile, with a sophisticated and probing look in his eyes. Uncle Jordanson, hello, I'm Lin Ju. I know you, the recently famous, Ellen on Wall Street, like to help others and help the weak. Jordan narrowed his eyes slightly and carefully observed the young man in front of him. No, he could even be called a young man. He had a handsome face, eyes like stars, and his whole person exuded an extremely confident and sunny temperament. This is rare in Gotham, which is full of robbery, drug trafficking, and murder. I hope you can take good care of Emily. Jodson looked directly into Lin Ju's eyes, but Lin Ju was not afraid at all, with a calm face, and nodded yes. His calm look made Jordan couldn't help but nod secretly in his heart. He stretched out his broad, calloused palms and patted Lin Ju's shoulder hard. His seemingly thin body did not waver at all. Jordan's eyes flashed slightly, and then he led Lin Ju into his processing factory as if nothing happened. As a close friend of Emily's father, Jodson runs a winery with a history of more than 20 years. He has always provided the beer supply for Emily's bistro. Because of the structure of the house, sunlight can shine through the roof glass and shine into the winery. Inside, a burly man was constantly shuttling between the wine-making machines. Going straight to the gathering place where the packing boxes had been prepared, Jodson waved, and soon two strong men in jackets walked up to them and began to move the wine boxes towards the truck rented by Lin Ju. I've also heard about the biker gang this time. There will definitely be a peaceful time in Wallier Street. During this time, I hope you won't cause trouble, because now you are no longer alone. Jodson leaned against the wall pillar and looked directly at Lin Ju, who had a calm face. He had a rough estimate of Lin Ju's character. At least he was by no means a bad guy. He also had good skills and was willing to help Emily. It could not be better. Do not worry. Soon after all the wine boxes were moved to the truck, Lin Ju said goodbye to Jodson and followed the truck back. Boss, is this guy reliable? A strong white young man muttered with a hint of dissatisfaction on his face. He had always wanted to help Emily, but was severely warned by Jodson. Now an Asian man appeared out of nowhere and was affirmed by Jodson, which made him feel a little unbalanced. What's more, before Emily's father was killed by gangsters due to gang conflicts, Emily had always been the jewel of their drinking gang, although she had never been recognized by Emily's father. Okay, hurry up and unload the goods for me, and interrupt your thoughts about Emily as soon as possible. She is not something you can touch. Yes. Looking at Jordan's suddenly serious expression, the young man's expression changed and he immediately corrected his attitude. The truck sped along the busy street, and with Lin Ju's reminders from time to time, it returned to Emily's bistro without any danger. Along the way, he saw two robberies taking place. Remember, it was still daytime. The thoughts in his brain were running wildly. Looking at the tavern filled with laughter, an idea suddenly came to Lin Ju's mind. Haha, Lin, you are finally back. Dan swayed his fat body and ate fried chicken while rushing over with an excited face. Lin Ju's eyes narrowed slightly and he cleverly avoided a hand stained with oil. Hey, Dan wiped his hand along the scarf on his chest. Lin, did you go find trouble with those guys last night? Without. Hello Shin. All those guys were killed by a mysterious man last night. My friend at the police station told me that all those guys had their neck bones kicked off. That mysterious hero is definitely a non-human being. Oh, unexpectedly, Damu had such a relationship. Lin Ju looked at the swaying little fat man in front of him with a smile. Moreover, those people also gave that mysterious hero a nickname, the Judge. Judge, that's a good name. Haha, I think so too. We only have one dark night in Gotham. How can we deal with so many criminals? Now there is a new superhero, and our city's name will definitely overwhelm that green guy in Star City next door. Green Arrow. Yeah, Green Arrow. Bang. Along with the shattering of the window glass, a slender figure instantly fell to the ground. Her big eyes stared at the night sky of Gotham without a trace, and a teardrop slowly crossed her delicate face. After a long time, her chest finally stopped rising and falling. Meow. The shrill cat calls continued. A black cat rushed out of the dark alley, ran to the woman's body, and stared at the lifeless woman quietly. The cat calls resounded in this deserted street. One cat after another came out of the alley and surrounded the woman. A weird atmosphere lingered around. The cat calls one after another made Linju, who happened to pass by the corner of the street, stop and look at the group of weird cats in surprise. I don't know if it was because of his gaze or the cats felt a little boring, they jumped away and soon disappeared in various dark corners. Looking at the slender figure lying quietly on the ground, Linju sighed slightly. If it was in his previous life, the first thing he could think of when seeing this scene was to call the police, but now, he seems to have gotten used to encountering corpses on the way. Pushing the cart, Linju planned to send these discarded wine bottles to the waste treatment plant in exchange for a certain amount of compensation. Ding ding ding. Amid the collision of glass bottles, Linju slowly walked into the alley. Ah! Patrina's lifeless eyes, pupils suddenly shrank, chest rose and fell violently, and she grabbed her head in pain. For some reason, she was alive again. At the other end of the street, a man with lip needles, earrings, hip-hop and leather jacket walked out of the alley. Behind him followed two men with the same style of dress. Several people put their shoulders on each other and shouted loudly. One of them immediately noticed Patrina, who was trying to struggle to get up. At his smiling eyes, the three ran to Patrina's side. Seeing Patrina struggling for a long time and unable to stand up, their eyes flashed with surprise. Haha, beautiful lady, what's wrong? Do you want us to help you? No need. Patrina's face was slightly gloomy. She didn't know why she didn't die, but the current situation made her heart a little flustered. The man with the lip needle didn't care about Patrina's refusal at all. He subconsciously reached out to grab Patrina's shoulder. The soft touch made him reveal a lewd expression. Let me go. Patrina's face was pale, she clenched her teeth, and subconsciously swung her hands to push the man's hands aside, but soon, a feeling of powerlessness lingered around her again. Hee, brothers help you, don't you appreciate it? The man showed a pair of yellow-stained teeth, and his eyes stared at Patrina's fair and delicate face. Brothers, let's help this beauty. Let's kindly take her in tonight. Haha, Ham is right. The three men had lewd smiles on their faces, and 6 hands reached out to Patrina. Seeing this, Patrina closed her eyes unwillingly. She didn't expect that she was lucky enough to survive, but she would suffer such a disgusting thing again. With her eyes closed, Patrina was uneasy. After a long time, the hands of the gangsters still didn't touch her. She opened her eyes with some trepidation, and the scene in front of her stunned her. A man in a black windbreaker and a western hat turned his back to her, and his hands with black leather gloves lifted 2 white men who were 1.8 meters tall in the air. As for the man who originally teased Patrina, his eyes were wide open, and he fell to the ground with blood flowing from all his orifices. His whole body was still twitching. Patrina, who was very observant, noticed that there was a palm-sized dent on the man's chest, as if his sternum was shattered by a palm. The thoughts in her mind flowed quickly, and Patrina's pupils shrank slightly. Help! The hoarse and painful voice resounded in the silent street, and Linju's deep pupils looked back and forth at the 2 ugly men. You are so unlucky. I was going to leave, but your happy laughter spread to another street. I also want to be happy with you. One of the men was in tears, and his tears mixed with snot almost dripped on Linju's leather gloves. He shouted hoarsely. He kicked the man's chest casually, and in an instant, the man's figure was like a cannonball, hitting the wall next to him heavily. Bang! The gravel splashed, and the man lost his voice instantly. Covering his nose, Linju frowned and looked at another man with a terrified expression and a red face. He looked at the man's crotch with some disgust. Some liquid was slowly flowing down, and a strange smell was instantly amplified under Linju's extraordinary sense of smell. He kicked the man away again, and Linju gently fanned with one hand, trying to dispel the strange smell, and then turned around. Oh, lady, I think you misunderstood. At this time, Patrina had sat up at some point, holding a knife in one hand, facing Linju from a distance. Why did you kill them? Kill? There's no way. What I hate most is men bullying women. Judging from their performance, it seems that this is not the first time. Lin Ju tilted his head and spread his hands to one side, looking helpless. Thank you. Katrina looked at the masked man in front of her with a wary look. She couldn't blame her for being too cautious. It was really the changes in front of her that made it difficult for her to feel relieved. The force of the man's punch and kick was beyond her common sense, and one kick could kill someone. This was no longer the realm of normal people. The next moment, something happened that once again subverted her three views. The figure of the man in front of her turned into afterimages. In the blink of an eye, he came in front of her. She punched the man like a reflex, but he was instantly punched. Catch. Ma'am, it's not a good idea to retaliate with kindness. After casually grabbing the dagger from Katrina's hand, Lin Ju put the dagger back into the scabbard hanging on her waist. He carried the struggling woman on his back and walked slowly down the quiet street. Where is your home? What, aren't you going to carry me to your house? Although you are very beautiful, I am not greedy for food. Lin Ju looked at a group of abandoned residential buildings that were about 70 or 80 years old and felt a little bit the same way. Under the guidance of Katrina, he quickly found the girl's house. He placed the slim and amazingly curved woman on the somewhat worn sofa, and then covered her with a blanket. Lin I turned around and left. Etc. As if he didn't hear the call from behind, Lin Ju walked out of the room without any pause, closed the security door, and turned into an afterimage, disappearing into the dark corridor.